Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Neglected Naruto fights in Kiri's Civil War harem. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by the Pyroman, link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. See you after the war. It was finally over. The battle for the bridge was done, and in a few weeks' time, the bridge would be finished to allow the land of waves to be connected to the other elemental countries. Naruto sighed in exhaustion as he fell to the ground. Sakura and Kakashi were doing a damage report to see what or who had been damaged during the fight. Sasuke was simply taking the time to think and brood lightly as he usually did, which Naruto didn't see why, as reporting the damage was much more important. Naruto had an excuse to fall down and take a break, though, as even this early in the day, it had been an exhausting one. Naruto recalled how he came late into the scene, where Sasuke was stuck in an icy dome of mirrors and Kakashi was battling Zabuza. He was able to do some damage to Haku outside of the mirrors, but he made the mistake of rushing into the dome to help Sasuke. For the smallest moment, though, he had gone into one of the mirrors much like Haku did, and for that small moment, Haku didn't have any access to one of the mirrors. For that small moment, Haku was significantly more vulnerable than before. Naruto then turned his head to the side, looking at the spot where Zabuza and Haku had been placed down at to die. He couldn't help but wonder what happened to them, but he was sure that they were alive. Naruto was engulfed by rage and had begun to draw power from the Kyuubi's chakra. He was so enraged by Sasuke's apparent death that the demon inside got the better of him, feeding off of his negative emotions and reshaping them into evil chakra. In the demonic form, he was strong enough and fast enough to attack Haku. He lunged at one of the mirrors and hit the masked figure with everything he had inside of him. Doing this caused all of the ice mirrors to break, thus releasing them from their prison. Haku was hit so hard that it took him a moment to get up, and when he did, his mask broke, revealing his face to Naruto. Naruto couldn't believe that the pure and kind-hearted person he had met in the woods was the person that he was fighting now. He couldn't understand it and stopped using the Kyuubi's chakra. All he could manage to do was lightly punch Haku in the face, not wanting to fight him anymore. Haku could not understand this. Naruto had proven to everybody that he was stronger than Haku, but he was not willing to end the fight. Haku pleaded almost endlessly for the blonde boy to end his life, and for some time, Naruto resisted before finally giving in. In this time, Kakashi defeated Zabuza and was about to end his life. Before Naruto could finish the job, Haku sped off to protect his master. Unfortunately, Haku was not fast enough to fully absorb the attack, and Kakashi's lightning-infused hand was partially in Haku's side. Haku had said a few short words before dropping to the ground, no longer strong enough to stand on his own. Soon after, Gato made his presence known by laughing at Haku's demise and even went as far as dubbing him a woman to rile everyone up even more. Zabuza changed sides at the last minute and helped Team 7 kill Gato and his men with the last of his strength. After it was all done, Zabuza requested to be set down next to Haku to spend his last moments with his most precious person. Slowly, Naruto rose to his feet and looked down at the message written in the pool of blood that accumulated between the two missing men. Naruto looked at it curiously and read it aloud. "See you after the war," Naruto said quietly to himself as he looked at the spot Zabuza's giant sword had been at. He could only take guesses at what happened to the two and the sword. "Hey, Naruto," the voice of his sensei brought him out of his thoughts on the two ninja. "Damage is assessed and everyone's agreed to just take a break for the day. They'll get back to working on the bridge tomorrow, so let's head back to Tezuna's house and relax for the rest of the day." Both Sasuke and Sakura picked up on Kakashi's words, thinking about what he had said. Sakura didn't seem to mind it at all, and Sasuke was rather neutral about the decision. Of course he wanted to train and become stronger, but even he had to admit that it had been a long morning that deserved rest. With everyone agreeing, Team 7, Tezuna, Inari, and Tsunami all headed back to the home of the master bridge builder and probably soon to be mayor, if not new leader, of Wave Country. Heading back to the house, Naruto still thought about the demon of the hidden mist and the ice master. He wondered where they went off to and how they could have possibly escaped. Both of them were too tired to move and they were most likely going to die lying down next to each other. As he lay down on his bedroll, he looked up at the ceiling and attempted to remember as much as he could about the past week. The first thing he had thought of was his meeting with Haku. Naruto lay on the ground as he got his rest. Because of Inari, Naruto was angered beyond belief and decided to leave Tezuna's house to train. He trained himself to exhaustion that night and he could feel the soreness of his body when he woke up the next morning because of a sudden sound. The sound turned out to be a lovely woman who had dubbed herself Haku. Naruto shared his name as well, and the two talked for a short moment before Haku finally left, telling the blonde that she was actually a man. His had surprised Naruto and got the demon fox inside of him to cackle like a man. Naruto still couldn't believe that Haku was the masked hunter nin that saved Zabuza. He could also not believe that Haku was a man, and why the Kyubi laughed uncontrollably whenever Naruto thought about Haku being a man. The boy then thought back on the most recent battle before Gato and his men showed up. Naruto had just punched Haku out of the icy dome and onto the ground. Apparently, he had hit him so hard that it took the hunter Nin a moment to get back to his feet. Once he did, Naruto charged at him, but stopped as the porcelain mask cracked in two and fell to the ground. Naruto was able to see Haku's face again, and the violent chakra that shrouded him dissipated into the air. "Haku?" Naruto asked, his voice only above a whisper. Haku said nothing, his deep brown eyes staring at the fist that was only inches away from his face with a blank expression. While he said nothing, Naruto knew that he was the same person he saw in the woods several nights ago. "You're with Zabuza?" Naruto didn't know what to say. Haku was one of the kindest people he had ever met and he was working alongside the enemy. Haku shook his head and turned slightly to look into Naruto's eyes. "I used to," he told Naruto. "I'm useless to him now." Dead weight. Naruto still wasn't sure what to say to him. "What do you mean?" he asked in response. "I'm a broken tool now. I've been bested in battle after giving it my all. Zabuza-sama has no use for broken tools." Something in Naruto clicked as he remembered what Haku had said to him in the forest about protecting your precious people no matter the cost. He's your precious person. But he's the enemy. Haku suddenly became stern as he locked eyes with Naruto with ferocity. "He may be the enemy to you, but he saved me. I am indebted to him." Haku told Naruto, getting him to retract his fist. "Civil wars are common in Karigakure because of Kekkei Genkai users like myself. We're known to be harbingers of war and are feared because of our power. My own father killed my mother because she had Hyoten as well. He almost killed me as well. I managed to escape, but I went hungry for several days, then Zabuza-sama found me. He took me in and trained me to become his tool, to be there for whatever he needed. I owe him my life and so much more, and I failed at the one thing he needed of me." He then looked at Naruto with a serious expression. "You must kill me." What?" Naruto faltered. He couldn't understand why he wanted for him to kill him. "You were the one who broke my demonic ice mirrors, my strongest attack. You must be the one to kill me." It went on like this for several minutes. They argued about Haku's fate, with each of them saying the same things over and over like broken records. Finally, Naruto relented, though he did not want to kill Haku. Just before he could finish the job, Haku dashed off to protect his master once more by shielding him from Kakashi's Rikiri. However, he wasn't fast enough to completely take the blow. Kakashi ended up having half of his hand jammed in Haku's side, then the boy fell to the ground after a few words to Zabuza, who regretted making Haku the way he was. The scene was interrupted by Gato, who appeared with all of his men. He went on and gloated about how he was always planning on cutting Zabuza out of the deal after the Konoha ninja were dealt with. He had even joked about Haku being a woman to get his men riled about killing Zabuza and the others. For the moment, Zabuza and Kakashi agreed on a truce, just in time to see Inari and Tsunami with several men from the village, all ready to fight Gato's men. Then, Zabuza went on a killing spree, ending the lives of as many of the mercenaries as possible before killing Gato himself. When it was all said and done, Zabuza fell down and was dragged over to Haku. Everyone let Zabuza say what he had to say and watched as it began to snow all around them. They all knew now that Zabuza had regrets for raising Haku like he did and wished that Haku would accept his apology in the next world. Then they had disappeared, as Naruto remembered, and he and the rest of Team 7 went back to Tezuna's house for food, rest, and relaxation for the rest of the day. Not to mention celebrating the death of Gato. As Naruto thought about it all, he began to drift into unconsciousness and eventually fell asleep. He dreamed of thinking of a way to save Haku and Zabuza, even though they had been enemies for the past week. Haku was such a sweet and kind boy who was willing to do whatever it took to protect the people most important to him, and Naruto truly felt bad for not thinking of another way out. Suddenly, Naruto woke up in the middle of the night because of something he had heard. When he sat up and looked around, he saw that the window to his room was open and a note pinned to the ground by several senbon needles was just beside his head. While he was alarmed because of the closeness, he made sure to keep quiet as he read the note. "Join Kiri's rebellion. They'll appreciate you more than anyone in your pathetic village seems to," was what he had read from the note. There was no name on it and Naruto did not recognize the handwriting as it was rather messy and rushed and he didn't think that he knew anyone who spoke or thought like that. The senbon that came with the note made him think though and connected a few dots in his head. Still, he was just about dead when Naruto last saw him, so he wasn't sure how he was able to recover as quickly as Naruto could. Looking around and listening, Naruto made sure that everyone was still asleep before putting the note in his pocket, hiding the senbon with his equipment, and peeking out through the window before laying back down and sleeping. The next week went by fast, with Kakashi suddenly wanting to train his students more and Team 7 helping with the building of the bridge. With the new enthusiasm of the building team, as well as the large additions of people who now wanted to help because Gato was no longer a problem, the bridge had finished much faster than anyone had originally expected. When the final day of building came along, Naruto and the rest of his team had been given permission to do as they pleased for the day, to allow the people of Wave to finish up the bridge. While Naruto wanted to help finish it, he was glad that he could help out all of these people. For the past week, they had been happier than ever. They had thanked and congratulated Naruto and the team for all they had done, and even began to prepare a celebration for when the bridge was finally done. Currently, the 3 genin of Team 7 were walking through the streets of Wave, taking in the much happier scenery. Sakura-chan. Naruto stated, looking to his crush that was on the other side of Sasuke. Do you maybe want to go to this festival thing when the bridge is done? He asked her both with curiosity and quickly dying hope. Sakura didn't hesitate to shake her head and respond with her usual response. Of course not. I'm going to be going with Sasuke-kun. You should have known that, Naruto baka. She verbally berated him, getting the blonde boy to sigh as he moved on to other thoughts. Suddenly, the cycloptic sensei of the genin appeared before them, getting them to stop walking and look at him with curiosity, or neutrality in Sasuke's case. What's up Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked, getting Sakura to nod in agreement to what he had said. She believed there was no use saying anything after one of the 3 of them spoke, so nodding would state that she was also interested. The bridge is just about done, and everyone is going to get together for the grand opening. Kakashi told them, getting Naruto to jump in excitement and Sakura to squeal in delight. Yes. That means the festival will happen tonight and Sasuke-kun and I can have a perfect and romantic evening, all sealed at the end of the night with a romantic kiss. Sakura fantasized, causing Naruto to glare at Sasuke. Sasuke simply didn't care and was glad that they were finally going to leave the worthless village and country. Yeah. Kakashi replied offhandedly. Honestly, he didn't see the chances of Sasuke coming around to liking Sakura, but in a world with magical monsters made out of energy and people who could call upon the elements, maybe the loner of the class would get with the fangirl. So anyway. Let's get going. Kakashi told his team, walking back to the bridge at a slow and lazy pace. The genin quickly caught up with their Jonin sensei and gathered at the now finished bridge. Azuna, Tsunami, and Inari all stood on a decently sized platform, overlooking all of the workers and people of the village of the Land of Waves. When Naruto and the rest of the team showed up, the master bridge builder and his family took notice of them and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the ninja that made all of this possible. Tazuna announced, causing the crowd to look around and split into 2 sections, allowing Team 7 to get to the platform. Naruto smiles confidently as he walked with his team and turned to face everyone once there reached Tazuna and his family. Tazuna cleared his throat before talking to the crowd. People of Wave. Ever since Gato and his men showed up in our village, we have seen nothing but poverty and misfortune. Life hasn't been easy for us, and I do believe that I'm speaking for everyone when I say that I feared that I might not wake up the next morning. But still, despite all of this, we made things work, we got started on the bridge, and now we finished it. After all this time, and all of the trouble we went through, we finished the thing that would reunite the people of Wave with the rest of the elemental nations, and it's all thanks to this boy right here. Tazuna then grabbed Naruto by the shoulder and pulled him close, much to Naruto's surprise and embarrassment. This boy right here was the one who decided to keep on protecting me and finish the mission, even though I lied to their Hokage about the mission details. He was the one who convinced that sword-wielding man to kill Gato, and he was the one who showed my grandson the truth about heroes. Now, I'm absolutely sure that I'm speaking for everyone here when I say that we wouldn't be here without this boy. Because of his actions, I am proud to announce that the Wave Festival of Hope will be celebrated in his honor, with Naruto Uzumaki as the hero of Wave. Now, without further ado, I announce the Great Naruto Bridge, open. He called out, getting everyone to cheer for the bridge and for Naruto. Naruto wasn't sure what to say. He was left speechless and blushing slightly. He had never been talked about so greatly before and he was unable to say or do anything in response. His teammates were just as surprised as he was, but were handling the surprise much differently than he was. Sasuke simply glared at Naruto, slightly angered that he was hardly talked about at all, and his name wasn't even mentioned. Sakura was surprised that Naruto was the main focus of the speech, but even she had to agree that he had worked hard during the mission and deserved some credit. Of course she was a little mad that Sasuke wasn't mentioned all that much, but she was otherwise happy, but she would never show it, after all, they were praising the class idiot. As the day passed, people got more and more ready for the upcoming festival. It was supposed to start just after lunch, but was held back by Tazuna, who had a brief fight with Tsunami, because he already wanted to start drinking in celebration. Instead the festival started at around 3 in the afternoon, but nobody really cared about the delay, since it unofficially started when it was actually supposed to. Naruto had a pretty good day with the festival, then again, it was his first time going to a festival where he wasn't being hunted or stabbed, attacked, or harmed. He truly felt appreciated by the people around him, many of them wearing masks of all sorts and variations. Naruto believed that the reason for the masks was because a person could look beautiful but have an ugly personality, and vice versa. He wasn't as happy as he could be, though, as Sakura spent all of her time dragging Sasuke to each and every halfway decent spot she found, trying to get him to open up to her as she had wanted him to. Naruto still had a decent time, though, despite not being with his crush. The people were nice to him and offered him many treats and items out of thankfulness. They had even given him his own festival mask, but he had decided not to wear it. As the day passed, nightfall quickly took over the village in the land of waves. However, it didn't stop the people from celebrating. Everyone turned on their lights and lit up their candles, all prepared to party till dawn. Sometime well into the celebration, Naruto was walking through the crowd of masked faces before feeling someone grabbing his shoulder. Quickly, the boy turned around and looked at the person behind him. Like most all of the other people in the festival, this woman wore a mask, hers designed with swirling blue tides, all in an icy blue color. The woman also wore a pale blue kimono and seemed to have all of her hair pulled back. She was a fair bit taller than Naruto was, probably having a few years on him as well. "Hello. I just wanted to thank you for all you've done for me and the people here," she said to him, her voice sweet and melodic to his ears as he listened. Naruto smiled and looked at the mask of the woman, blushing from the thoughts of what the woman with such a beautiful voice looked like without the mask. I was just trying to help. If it wasn't for Kakashi-sensei and Sasuke team, we wouldn't have been at the bridge with that Zabuza guy on our side," he told her modestly. The woman didn't show any signs of movement but laughed lightly. "As with any tale, I'm sure there's more to it," she said back to him, pausing for a moment before speaking again. "Team? Is that what you call your teammate, the one who was dragged around by that talkative pink-haired girl?" Naruto nodded with a sigh. "Yeah, that's him. Though I wish she was dragging me around instead," he muttered the second part to himself, but not quietly enough for the woman to not hear him. Why? He didn't seem to be having a good time in the least, with the girl talking his ear off about something in relation to destiny and love. "Can you explain why you're in love with her? Do you think she could love you in the same way she appears to love him?" She asked him these questions, making the boy think heavily on his life choices up to this point. He knew his chances were slim, but it had never stopped him from doing something. He had fought and fought all his life, and he continued to battle against the odds of things. He assured himself several times that he would eventually win her over and prove that Sasuke wanted nothing to do with her, but now he doubted it. While he was thinking, he did not see the masked woman move her mask up, allowing for the bottom half of her face to be seen. Slowly, she bent down to Naruto and placed her lips over his. It was a short kiss, but seemed to last much longer than the few seconds that it actually did. As soon as her lips came in contact with his, Naruto's brain began to restart. He wasn't used to all of this affection and good treatment, so he was already put off a little bit, but the kiss had sent his brain haywire, forcing him to take time to reboot. In the time that it took for Naruto's brain to restart, the woman had already pulled her mask back down and begun to walk away. When he had looked around and found her, she was being escorted away by a rather tall man in a similar pale blue outfit. Before Naruto could get to them and talk to them more, they had disappeared into the crowd. Well, where'd she go? Naruto continued to look around for her for the rest of the night, but was unable to find the woman that had asked him important questions about his choices in life, causing him to reevaluate what he wanted out of life. As he looked around, a heavy blush could be seen on his face. He wasn't bothered at all that the woman had kissed him. After all, he had already considered himself ruined after Sasuke had gone up and kissed him in front of everyone when they first became genin. Of course Sasuke would do something like that in an effort to keep the weaker Kunoichi in training away, but he didn't have to use Naruto to do it. While Naruto continued to look for the woman, he found out that it was becoming more and more unlikely with each passing minute into the early morning and eventually decided to head back to Tezuna's house, not taking note of the small piece of paper that had been tucked into his pocket earlier that night. The day after the festival was mainly comprised of helping the village clean up everything, despite Tezuna saying that it wasn't needed since they were already so indebted to Naruto and his team. Even with Tezuna saying that they had the situation handled, Team 7 still decided to help out anyway, waiting until the next day to head back to Konoha. Naruto had yet to change his clothes as he had spent all of his time trying to find a woman that his team didn't believe existed. "I'm telling you, she pulled me away from the crowd and kissed me," Naruto said seriously. Sakura shook her head with a half smirk. "Oh really now? If you believe that this obviously fake person came up and kissed you and talked good about you instead of Sasuke-kun, where's your proof?" she asked him, wanting to make him admit defeat and that this was all some stupid ploy to get them to like him more. Naruto searched himself. He knew he probably wasn't going to find anything, but he needed just the smallest thing to prove to them that it actually happened. As he searched himself, a small scrap of paper fell out of his pants pocket and down to the ground. Naruto saw it just as it landed and picked it up to inspect it. Naruto-kun. The mountain hot spring inn is a nice place in Kiri. You should go there and relax sometime. He read to his team, though they still refused to believe that it happened. When the moment finally came for Naruto and everyone to head back to their home village, many teary and goodbyes were made, mainly between Inari and Naruto, in which the former was seeing the latter as a brother figure and didn't want him to leave. Unfortunately, Team 7 eventually had to leave and went back home to turn in the mission. The team was able to turn in the mission and get increased pay due to the raise in difficulty and complexity of the mission, not to mention all of the bounties on Gato's head being shared among Naruto and Sakura, as it was only Kakashi's duty to watch over and supervise their missions, and Sasuke had the entire Uchiha fortune to himself. For the next week, it was back to simple D-ranked missions for Team 7. Nothing much happened in that time, but Naruto still continued to wonder about the two disappearing and presumed dead ninja. As the time passed, Naruto continued to go over everything that he had seen that day during the battle on the bridge, and absolutely nothing he saw helped him in any way. One moment they were there, and another moment they were gone with a note written using the pooled blood. Naruto lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his room as he continued to review every little detail. Suddenly, it had appeared in his mind that Zabuza and Haku were far too weak to do something like that on their own and couldn't have written that message in the time allotted. Somebody must have taken them away from the scene. Another idea appeared in his mind. He remembered how those two ninja with the crazy gauntlets were able to hide and move through water and puddles of water, so he wondered why would that not extend to blood, which was a liquid as well. Just as he thought about the demon brothers, two figures appeared in Naruto's room, standing at the end of Naruto's bed. Naruto jumped up in fear and reached around for a kunai. Before he was able to, a steel hand reached out and grabbed a hold of him. "Keep quiet." One of the voices demanded quietly. Naruto nodded quickly and tried to look for a way out. The man that held Naruto above his bed looked over his shoulder and at the other figure. It was misplaced. The other voice said, getting the first person to nod. It was too dark in Naruto's room to identify either of the figures, but he knew that he had no idea who they were. Their voices were raspy and gravely, obviously underused. "Doesn't matter. He's coming." The first person holding Naruto said, getting the other to nod before the first let go of Naruto and allowed him to fall onto his bed. "Who are you and where am I going?" he asked them, getting into a weak defensive stance. "I'm not going anywhere, I'm going to be the Hokage." One of them seemed to chuckle or laugh, but sounded more like someone clearing their throat. The other one did as well, and they both looked at the boy, their eyesight being much better than his. "They don't care about you. They won't care when you're gone." The one who was previously holding Naruto said. The second one nodded slightly. "Pathetic." All of them. Naruto's eyes widened as he thought about the word. Dots were beginning to connect as he thought and eventually turned on the lights in his room to prove his suspicions. As he turned on the lights, the two figures could be identified as the demon brothers themselves, with their long and wild hair, their large gauntlets, and the horns on their headbands. "What are you guys doing here? Now that I know what you can do, I can beat you," Naruto said confidently, already preparing to spawn clones. "Shut up and come with us. You're needed." Mizu, the one with two horns said. "Needed where?" Naruto asked. "Ozu," the other one, answered. "Kiri. You should be smart enough to read. There's a civil war." Naruto began to connect more and more dots together. Haku had said something about a civil war and the note left in his and Zabuza's absence said something about a rebellion. He was led to assume that they were one and the same. That thing Haku was talking about. They nodded, not bothering to speak. Naruto thought about it long and hard. The more he thought about it, the more it was beginning to sound like a good idea. They would appreciate his help in the civil war and he was sure that they wouldn't hate him like the majority of Konoha did. After what seemed like a full hour of thinking, but was only several minutes in reality, Naruto nodded, but quickly fell to the ground as somebody gave him a strong hit to the back to the skull. Naruto fell over, but the figure behind him caught him and put him back on his bed. "I don't know what the hell you're doing, but you weren't going to wash Naruto's mind and take him somewhere," the person spoke. The voice was obviously feminine, but not the same feminine voice that the demon brothers were used to hearing. This one was strong, cocky, and almost mad in a sense. "Kiri needs him more than you do," Gozu answered, looking at the woman. Her entire set of clothes stood out to them, with her wire mesh undershirt, a skin-colored shirt under the mesh armoring, a short orange skirt, metal shin guards, and a tan trench coat. "Oh really now? You better explain yourselves before I kill the both of you," she threatened, getting them to look at her. They were silent for a moment, sharing glances and almost speaking from mind to mind. Anko was sure they couldn't actually do that, though, and just assured herself that they knew each other well enough to pick up on the smallest of things. Their village hates him. He has no reason to stay here. When the rebellion in Kiri takes over, he'll be treated as a hero, as a human being, and will get proper treatment. That will never happen here. One of them explained. Since their mouths were covered and neither of them moved as they spoke, she was unsure which one was speaking or if they were taking turns talking. This rebellion. You're taking out the Mizukage of the Bloody Mist? Anko asked, now rather interested in the situation. Mizu nodded. They want me and my brother to help and they want Naruto to help as well. They who? Anko inquired further. Allies? Was what they said simultaneously, knowing what to say and what not to say because of a briefing the week before. The rebellion. They said together once again. Anko became quiet for a moment, thinking over the situation and how it could play out. They were certainly right with the majority of the village not wanting Naruto, and Kiri most likely treating him like one of the cage if he plays a big part in the movement. In an instant, Anko disappeared in a puff of smoke, causing Gozu and Mizu to wait around for other ninja to appear, but a minute later, she returned with several sealing scrolls and tossed some to the demon brothers. They simply looked at her, expecting her to tell them what she was thinking. Come on. His house won't seal itself. I've already prepared for something like this, so I'm all set. She told them with a smirk, causing them to share a glance before sealing everything up. They'd simply have to tell their boss them that a person decided to come along. They weren't sure what Naruto wanted to keep and what he didn't want, so they simply sealed up absolutely everything, leaving his house blank and empty like a property waiting to be moved into. With the three of them packing up everything as quickly as possible, they finished sealing everything in record time. There was one thing that wasn't sealed though, and that was a scroll that Anko had found under Naruto's pillow. When Anko went to inspect its contents, she was surprised to see that it was filled with jutsu, many of them believed by her to be powerful and able to decide the victor of a battle. Almost all of them were new to her except one, which she had learned from her trader of a sensei. She knew the hand signs to it by heart and only needed to do a single hand sign for it now. Despite all this, she was only able to make 2 or 3 of the unstoppable shadow clones at a time. She could only assume what all of these advanced and dangerous jutsu were and stuff the scroll into Naruto's pocket before making sure that everything was ready. When she looked around at the bare room, Anko picked Naruto up and looked at the demon brothers. Alright, let's go. She said to them with a smile, getting them to look at each other once more before leaping out the window, Anko tailing behind them with the boy. The 3 conscious ninja quickly escaped the village without any trouble. It was rather odd for Gozu and Mizu to go through a ninja village of all places and not really need to worry about being caught. In their entire week at Konoha, they had not once run into any ninja at all, and they believed that the village was even worse than they had thought before as a result of this. They ran for hours, quickly making their way to the coast in order to get to where they needed to be. They had only stopped because they needed a quick break from all of the running, and since the sun was rising, it was probably a good time to go and get some food. Anko, Gozu, and Mizu all sat down by the fire with their food, extra fish from a nearby stream cooking above the flames. Naruto continued to rest rather peacefully, completely unaware that he would not be in High no Kuni for much longer. So Anko said as she bit down on a fish. The demon brothers of Kurigakure. Always assumed you'd be working for the Mizukage, not against the crazy bastard. Mizu and Gozu said nothing, but both looked at Anko as she ate. They had already eaten by themselves while Anko watched over Naruto, ensuring that nobody would see their technique of eating through their masks. So what? You guys working for money? A debt? Anko listed off possible options, but they still said nothing. Of course they wouldn't say anything to her now. Despite them not saying anything, she had figured out their answer because of what they had said before. They were connected to all of this because of allies, which meant that they would probably get out of being missing nin if they helped kill the mad Mizukage. That was probably why a lot of dangerous people were fighting as rebels, the opportunity to be claimed as members of a renewed Kiri for helping to restore the balance and so thereby earn their place when they beat the Mizukage. Soon after, the group of 4 covered their tracks before taking off again. They simply followed the stream to the ocean, where they had to find transportation to Mizu no Kuni. It didn't take them long to find a boat and quickly set off. Naruto woke up on the ship several hours later but was unresponsive to the people around him. Instead of talking to them and asking questions, he simply looked at the passing water, not bothering to make a single sound. This worried Anko and took the demon brothers by surprise. They were aware of how loud and cocky the boy usually was, and now he wasn't anything like his usual self. He went back to sleep soon before they hit land, and Anko was forced to carry him again as she followed the demon brothers. When they stopped, they approached a lonesome inn and hotel combination. It was all by itself, surrounded by the mist and trees. It bore a sign declaring it to be the Mountain Hot Spring Inn. It had probably been named for the natural hot springs it had, which were heated by the mountain behind it. "We're here," one of the demon brothers said to Anko, not bothering to stop as they headed inside. Inside the inn was a small lobby with a sign at the counter saying that a new person who was to take over the counter would arrive shortly. However, the people that frequented the inn knew that the sign always stayed there and would probably never leave that exact spot. Gozu and Maizu led Anko down a hallway, walking toward a room at the far end of the hall. When they got there, they opened the door to reveal a staircase. The demon brothers then began to walk down it to get to where they needed to be. While they weren't sure what exactly would be said to them for having another person come along, one who was definitely not in the plan originally, they knew well that someone wouldn't be happy as a result of this change in plans. At the bottom of the staircase was a room about as big as the lobby, with a table and chairs at the center of the room. There were small desks all along the walls of the basement, filled with scrolls, ninja weapons, and all sorts of other things. At the table sat 3 figures. The one at the head of the table had long auburn hair and a single exposed green eye. She was dressed rather provocatively, not much unlike Anko was, just with different clothes of course, but an aura of power and strength originated from her. Beside her was a masked figure, wearing a mask that Naruto would have recognized had he been awake at that moment. The pale blue kimono was the same as well and looked just as it did when she had worn it when he saw her during the festival. On the other side of the auburn-haired woman was a rather tall man with spiky black hair and a mask covering the bottom half of his face. It wasn't unlike Kakashi's, but was a plain gray instead of dark blue or black. He wore a pale blue suit similar to the ninja with the mask and had a large broadsword strapped on his back. The person with the mask was first to speak, obviously focusing on the presence of Anko. Who is she and why is she here? The person asked Gozu and Maizu in an ambiguous voice, but there was obvious power in their words. Anko looked at the masked person, detecting a hint of something that gave off the feeling of concern. One who seemed to have concerns for Naruto. Looking at the masked person, Anko grinned. Anko Mitarashi, former snake mistress of Konoha and a ranking worker in the T&I division. Not to mention the sexiest kunoichi in the land. She said, giving a bow as she made her speech. She made it obvious that she was trying to be funny and didn't want any harm to come to her, but there was also a serious undertone that told the people around her that she would do anything necessary to protect herself if her hand was pushed. Why is she here? The masked person asked again to the demon brothers. Maizu and Gozu traded a look before looking at the 3 figures at the table. She insisted on coming. Doesn't seem to be nearly as pathetic as the others in that stupid village. She even helped us escape. They answered, knowing that while it would be enough, the masked person would still not be fully happy. The one with the sword hummed in thought. Why is he asleep? He needs to be up for all of this. Don't worry about him for now. The one with the green eye spoke up, getting everyone to put their attention on her as she looked at Anko. You weren't in the plan. Would you come all the way out here? I'm not saying I don't appreciate any extra hands, but I need to know your reasoning. Anko smiled, and it wasn't snide or hateful or even one of arrogance or pride, it was a genuine smile. She then leaned forward and spoke with obvious sincerity. Naruto here is like the little brother I always wanted but never had. If he left Konoha, I'd follow after him. I've always had my stuff sealed up in storage scrolls in case of the need for a quick getaway, and in that event, I'd take him with me to a safer place. She paused and looked down at Naruto. Like him, I was never really liked in Konoha. Other than him, all I had to tie me to it were about 2 other people, both of which having a closer relationship with me than Naruto did. She looked down at Naruto again. Honestly, I thought he would use the wave mission as his chance to get away from the village. First time out of the village and a perfect opportunity to get away. She told them, genuinely surprised he didn't use the wave mission to do so. The woman in the middle looked at Anko with a keen eye before glancing at Naruto in her arms. She was quiet for a moment before looking back up at her. I guess I can't convince you to leave. Not that I'd really try anyway. She muttered the second part. So you're going to cut ties along with Naruto, then? Work for Kiri from now on? Anko smiled again. Get me to leave Naruto? She replied, beginning the grin now. To answer that, how likely is it that you would get Iwa to bow down and declare Konoha as their overlords and then kiss the elders' wrinkly old asses? She was now trying to hold back her laughter as she could see them picturing it in their minds and trying not to at least smile at the amusing thought. Besides, if Naruto joins Kiri, I am damn well going to join too, so as to keep an eye on him and use my talents and to protect him and help him grow. She paused as she took a slight breath for dramatic effect, not to mention. Here she paused again. I am sure you could use the talents of someone who is a master with interrogation, seduction, and poison and hallucinogen making, not to mention personally trained by the legendary interrogator Ibiki Marino. She flaunted her skills with a grin. We'll work on the formalities later, and I've only got one rather cheaply headband prepared since we only expected Naruto, but anyways, welcome to the Kurigaku Rebellion and soon to be the new Kurigaku Ninja Corps. You and him will both get your official headbands when this is all over. She said with a smirk. My name is Mei Terumi and I'm the one leading the operation here. These 2 are friends of mine who have decided to come back for the cause even if their last attempt on the Mizukage's life didn't end well. When Mei finished talking, Naruto could be heard groaning, getting everyone to move their attention to him. Everyone watched with eagerness as he awoke and he looked around with a confused expression, clearly not knowing where he was at the moment. "Naruto?" the masked person asked. "Naruto, are you awake? Do you know where you are?" Naruto was unresponsive as he looked around, wondering who the people around him were. His quietness was starting to unnerve people, and his reply told them all that there was a serious problem at hand. Who's Naruto? Chapter 2. Mai-sama. Damn it. Mai cursed quietly with a twitching eyebrow as she looked at the boy in Anko's arms, his eyes deep blue and as naive as a newborn. There was no more spark or burning desire, just curiosity and confusion. "Okay, first things first. Why doesn't he know his own name?" Mai demanded, hoping someone had a good answer for her question. I think I can shed some light." Anko smiled sheepishly and glanced down at Naruto before looking at the rebellion leader. "See, when the demon brothers over there were about to take him away, I kinda knocked him out so he wouldn't see what I was planning on doing to them," she told Mai, hoping that she would understand and not kick her and Naruto out of the one thing that could get them away from Konoha. "He woke up on the boat ride here, but was pretty much unresponsive. We didn't know that I knocked the memory out of him." She laughed sheepishly, barely noticing the masked people shaking their heads at her. Mai sighed and rubbed the bridge of her nose before looking at Anko. "Okay. Let's try again," she said. "From what Oni and Yuki hear," she waved her hand, indicating the man with the sword and the other masked person next to him, both standing behind her. "Naruto here is a Jinchuriki." She saw the look of surprise on Anko's face and motioned for silence. "Don't worry. I have nothing against them personally, much as I have reason to be, given the circumstances of this civil war. Hell, he could be the son of Kami himself, as long as he is respectful and knows who not to kill. If he's like that, then I'll be happy. But that's straying from the point. The people from his clan are well known for their healing powers and ability to take injuries and still keep going. How does someone like that end up with a loss of memory from a simple blow to the head?" she said, staring blankly at Anko over her clasped hands in front of her face. Anko sighed and shook her head. "Not really sure. That Sakura girl on his team probably hits him harder than I do, so I'm surprised that something like this hasn't happened before." As she attempted to explain what happened to Naruto, she didn't see or hear another person walk into the room. When she was done speaking, she saw a person standing a small distance behind Mai. He had pale blue hair that was pointed upwards and had a small patch covering his right eye from view. Suddenly Anko's eyes widened as she realized something. "Actually, it might have been something I was trying to recreate and may have used without realizing it," she said sheepishly, now knowing that she actually might have hit Naruto too hard when she had knocked him out. Mai's eye twitched. "Please, this is trying my patience," she said, refraining from hitting Ao, who was standing by the door behind her, out of irritation. "A little thing called the strength of 100," Anko explained further. "But for me and how much I've been trying it, it's more like strength of 25. Mai-sama. We should get going back to camp. We have news from one of the recon groups," Ao told his superior. "We need to abandon or hold off on all current arrangements to get back sooner." Mai's eyebrow twitched violently as she stood from her seat. "Engagement," she whispered to herself as she turned around and glared at her guard. "Ao. Shut up before I melt you," she said in a dangerously cool tone of voice. Ao said nothing as he simply looked at her, filled with a kind of fear that only she could instill to him. He knew what she was capable of and why she was the leader of the rebellion, and he did not want that kind of power directed at him with the rage of a woman behind it. Anko coughed to clear her throat as she looked down at Naruto, who was still looking around with curiosity. "Should we get going now?" she told everyone, getting Oni and Yuki to nod. Mai sighed and held a hand over her face. "Ow, we cannot go directly to one of the bases, we have to take them to a safe house first, so that we can get Naruto here checked out to make sure everything is okay." She turned her head to look at Anko. "As for you, you're going to be on guard detail for Naruto, as well as watched by Oni and Yuki here. They will keeping an eye on the two of you. You more than him," she said, turning her head back at Ao to make it clear that he was to prepare to clear things out of the outpost they were currently in. "We will be heading to the Demon Rock safe house," she said, getting a look of shock from both Oni and Ao. The outline of a half smirk could be seen from Oni's mask once the shock wore off and he decided to speak up about the matter. "Mai-sama. I already made that place near impossible to get to, but that safe house is also in the Mizukage's territory. If his ninja don't kill us, the traps I made will." Anko eyed Oni suspiciously, already having ideas of his identity. Oni caught onto this and put on a mask that was not unlike Yuki-ana's. This made Anko sigh and look at Mai. "So we're going to travel into enemy territory, into a base or safe house that is protected by traps that even this guy says are dangerous." She nodded her head in the direction of Oni as she referred to him. "Just to give Naruto a mental checkup? You don't have anyone like that at your main base camp or whatever?" Mai grinned at Anko. "You say you were in T&I, yet you're forgetting a pretty important rule. Never take the direct path anywhere." She then pointed at Naruto. As for him, I highly doubt that he ever received a proper medical checkup that wasn't in some way botched. As a result, we're going to give him one. Getting one done cause of the memory loss is just giving it another reason to get it done. She then looked at Oni. I am sure that any trap you made would not stand up to my lava, Oni. After all, I'm sure then traps will melt at the sight of me like someone I know, she said in a slightly sultry voice, giving him a suggestive wink. Oni blushed heavily as he saw his leader winking at him. He was lucky that he had two masks on, or somebody would have seen how red his face currently was. He couldn't possibly deny the fact that she was a beautiful woman or the fact that she was immensely powerful. Because of their history, she knew exactly which of his buttons did what. Normally, Anko would have smirked at the implications of what the rebellion leader said. Instead, she simply huffed and looked at the red-haired woman. You didn't answer my question, she muttered under her breath, taking note how Mei didn't even mention having a doctor of some sort at the main camp. Mei shot Anko a wink. Actually, I did. But then again, I didn't as well. She said before barking orders into a microphone in her ear, causing the lights to brighten and rebellion members to come in and sedate Naruto. Yuki took Naruto from Anko's hands so that she could be sedated as well. She didn't truly understand the need to do so, but she was still an outsider, and knowing the route to a secret hideout for the rebels might not be something that she should know just yet. Once she was put to sleep, Oni picked her up and the group headed off, scattering and keeping a short distance from one another as to not seem like an actual group. 2 hours passed and Anko woke up to a slow start. As she looked around, she could tell that she was in a cave of some sort. Her back ached mildly, but despite this she forced herself to sit up and look around. She could see Yuki, Mei, and Oni a little ways in front of her, but Ao and the demon brothers were nowhere to be seen. Her vision was partially blurry, but she was still able to see Oni draw some blood, smear it on one of the walls of the cave, and use his titanic sword as if it were a big-ass key in the wall. Before all of their eyes, one of the walls moved, revealing a passageway. Mei and Yuki walked ahead of Oni as he went back to pick up Anko. He was slightly surprised to see her awake already and shake her head when he offered to carry her. Instead, he helped her up and walked alongside her into the cave. So you know Naruto? Oni spoke up, moving his head to look at Anko. Anko sighed and nodded. Yeah, known him since he was 6, been looking out for him since then as his older sister. Of course, can't keep an eye on him all the time, so I don't know everything that has happened to him in Konoha. Still, I do the best I can. Sometimes that means beating up civilians and a few dumbass ninja who got more shit than brains, she said, grinning at the memories of some of the beatdowns she had delivered over the years. There are misadventures he's had that I don't know about, and I just hope none of them caused any lasting damage, she said, a look of sadness spreading across her face that changed as she came to a realization. Wait, what about you? How do you know Naruto? I'm pretty sure that Kiri doesn't have any spies. She inquired, looking at Oni questioningly. Kiri has a few spies in Konoha. Oni stated. I'm not one of them, but I know who they are. Wife of one of the spies picked me up when I was a kid. I snapped during my exam test, never saw her or them again. Became Anbu, did assassin missions on the side and a good handful of bounties. I was in charge of one of the attempts on Yagura, the Mizukage's life. Failed, obviously, and took a break for a while. Anko nodded and smiled. Methinks that you may have said too much, Zabuza Mamachi, Anko said, grinning at Oni. Damn. Oni said simply, refusing to take the Anbu mask off as he looked away from her. Anko grinned. So, now I know how you really know Naruto, at least in part anyway. She then decided to ask something else, something she had always wanted to know, but never had the opportunity for it, despite being in T&I for quite a while, wrangling up and interrogation dozens of missing nin. There's one thing that always escaped me. She looked at Zabuza. The Black Village ST do exist, right? She asked. Zabuza laughed. A smile could be seen on his face if it wasn't hidden by his masks. And you call yourself a T&I master? He mocked her. Of course they exist. How do you think missing nin get around and escape as much as they do? How do you think the daimyo keep their hands so clean? He thought back on the Black Village of Water. The one here is more finicky than others, though. I've been to several of the Black Villages and none of them are like the one right here in the Land of Water. I'll tell you more later, though. Anko smiled. Maybe I might have to play some black market requests through you, since you're the one with the contacts and all, Anko said mysteriously as they made it to the main room of the underground base. The masked man simply looked at her, but under his masks, he gave her a curious and slightly deadpan look. Once Anko and Zabuza joined Yuki, Naruto, and Mei in the main room, Zabuza stepped in front of all of them and looked around. He could hear footsteps slowly getting louder, and he assumed that it was Ao and the demon brothers with the medics from the main camp. Zabuza pointed down one of the stone hallways, making everybody look down said hallway. Infirmary is down that way. Ana knows where it is. I need to get some things, so I'll meet you there in a bit. He said before walking off down another hallway. Yuki waited for the rest of the group to meet them before directing everyone down the hallway Zabuza was talking about and into the infirmary. Right in here. Yuki said as she guided everyone into the room, setting Naruto down on one of the beds and moving away to let the doctors do what they had to do. Mei looked at Naruto as she spoke to the doctors, full medical scan. Make sure it includes a mental checkup to see if we can't retrieve at least some of his lost memories. Run a blood test if you can, sample it and hold on to it for when we take over Kiri. Be sure to make sure he's stable. If Konoha could produce a ninja like Orochimaru, then it's possible they can make another mad scientist like him. She issued the commands, the doctors nodding and getting to work. Anko looked at Mei with a rather serious expression. Even after all these years, Orochimaru was always a sore subject for her. I didn't think people from Kiri would be interested in the missing nin of Konoha and what they do. Anko knew well that her former mentor was a heartless person that experimented on innocent people, as well as a man that was quite infamous throughout the nations, but she wanted to know how the rebellion leader knew as much as she did about him. Mei, looking at Anko, shot her a glare. Given that Kiri is known for making monsters, we tend to keep tabs on others who also make monsters. Some examples: Danzo, the Warhawk, Shimura, Orochimaru of the Densetsu no Sannin, and the elders of Konoha, Hamura and Kaharu, to name a few, she said, and given what we know about the Kyuubi and the annual fox hunts in Konoha from our informants, I think it would not be a stretch for some asshole doctor with low morals or no common sense to use Naruto here as a guinea pig for their inhuman experiments. Hence why I want to know if his body has been messed with. We don't have any files, but we know who he is and what he holds. She looked at Naruto. If he really does have Uzumaki blood, then he'll be of even higher priority than he is now. She then grinned, but it was an ironic grin, one of cold humor that holds no real amusement. You know, it's funny really, Konoha preaches about upholding history, but see how quick they are to forget the Uzumaki clan, the clan that helped them found so much of their village. Konoha's full of hypocrites. Spout nonsense about the will of fire and teamwork above all, but they'll be one of the first people to abandon you in a mission if it goes sour. Anko spat. I understand what you mean, Anko, Mei said, smiling a bit. The third Hokage is admirable, and his ideals are good, but most of that village has corrupted his and the first two Hokage's teachings. Mei let out a snort. It's ironic, they say respect their history, they really do, but if Naruto is in Uzumaki, then he's much more powerful, as well as connected, than anyone can believe. A Uzumaki branch from the Senju, so even if it's distant, he has relations to 2 out of the 4 Hokage. 3 If my hunch about the future is right. She then shot a look at Anko. Alright, forget about politics for now, it's time to get to the heart of the matter, before we can go to our main base, Mei finished, as she looked at Anko with a critical eye. Anko smirked cheekily, taking a glance at Naruto before redirecting her attention to Mei. And what might that be? She answered somewhat eagerly. Even in such a dire situation, she found a way to be as confident and cocky as ever. Mei sighed. Alright, let's cut the crap. We need to know why a master interrogator like you would be willing to drop everything for your so-called surrogate brother here and come after him. Well, we know that life for him wasn't pleasant in Konoha due to our informants and their efforts to get information for us on stuff going on in Konoha. We want to hear it from you. Why would Naruto have such loyalty to a village like Konoha, yet at the same time have such resentment for them? Mei told the younger woman, giving her a glare that threatened a fate worse than death if not answered truthfully. Anko sighed and looked down at the ground for a moment before looking back up at Mei. I can't tell you why. I have no idea why he's so loyal to the village that wants nothing but for his head to be put on a pike. I know he hates the village, he knows it too. She became quiet for a moment, thinking about Naruto. Maybe it's because he thought that if he endured their hate long enough, proved to them that he was strong enough to take what they threw at him, they'd eventually accept him. She knew that the boy was like her, and she gave Mei an answer that she knew Naruto would have because they were so alike. Mei sighed again. Well, to be honest, that is just retarded. If anything, they would hate him more for trying to get stronger, and then there is what others would do to him, or might have done to him, she said. Anko smiled sadly. He's naive, innocent. Even with all the hate around him, he's stunted to a point where he doesn't really understand their hate. It's stupid and ridiculous, but that's how it is. She paused once more, recalling some of the things he had told her and what she had seen of him. He isn't entirely like me. He doesn't understand that he isn't going to win their hearts like he wants to. He's made the best of his situation, though. I'm hated because of association. He's hated because people actually believe he is what he has sealed inside him, and nobody is going to look past that in Konoha. Then Mei started, planning the words in her head before speaking. Perhaps we should be asking why would he agree to come to Kiri, then willingly with the demon brothers escorting him. She sighed. If he is so loyal to Konoha, why leave willingly, why let himself be taken? Anko smiled sheepishly and rubbed the back of her head. Well, I kinda knocked him out before Naruto actually agreed. Me and the demon brothers sealed up everything he owns. He actually had a surprising amount of cash stored away though. He doesn't have a place there, even if he doesn't realize that. She explained, trying not to get Mei too angry with her for what she did. Mei sighed, alright, fine, tell me, what kind of person he was. Personality, likes, dislikes, what he's like overall. Mei said, trying to get an idea of what kind of person Naruto was personality-wise from someone who was apparently like a sister to him and thus would know him best. Anko nodded and did her best to recall Naruto's overall being. He's loyal to a fault, for one. As I've said before, innocent, naive, also not the brightest tool in the shed. Can't really take a hint and be pretty annoying at times, but his persistence is kind of admirable in a way. Even when he hits on that idiot Pinkette, it's nice to see that he isn't the kind of guy to give up easily. But don't think that I accept of his idiotic attempts for her love. She's a cheerleader for the Uchiha kid. She rides the first class seat on that bandwagon and tears down Naruto every chance she gets to make him out as an idiot. She shook her head, getting off track. Naruto, she reminded herself. He loves training and butting heads with the Uchiha and Inyazuka brats. Probably one of the biggest ramen nuts in the elemental nations. Ironically enough, he idolizes the Yondaime Hokage, a testament to his naivety, I guess. He loves that Kage Bunshin no jutsu of his and uses it every chance he can. There's a lot more to him than that, but that's Naruto Uzumaki in a nutshell. Anko suddenly opened her eyes as she realized she missed something. Oh, I almost forgot, he loves helping people who have been nice to him or he feels deserve to be helped. From what he told me about the mission to Wave, he was very helpful to those he encountered there. It seems he appreciates those who are kind to him and will defend those who can't defend themselves. Mei nodded, and as for you, I'm sure that there's more than just his well-being that plays into you going along with him. Not everyone becomes a missing nin intentionally. She inquired. Anko smirked at the thought of the little present that she had left behind at Naruto's house, meant specifically for the Hokage's eyes only. Because as much as he wouldn't like to admit it, the Gaki would be hopeless without me around to tell him which way is up. And besides, if the little something I left behind gets to the Sandaime like it's supposed to, then being a missing nin will be only a distant thought. Mei suppressed a groan at the obvious humor the woman before her was trying to pull off, you know what I mean. You say he's like a brother to you, and with what you've told me, it seems like he sees you as a sister or someone to look up to. My questions right now are why and how. She clarified. I think I've already given you some information about that. Anko started off on a serious note. We're a lot alike. I don't need to say that stuff again, so I'll get down to it. She said offhandedly, still not taking the situation as serious as Mei would have liked or preferred. 6 years ago, a month or so before his birthday. I was walking around, minding my own business at my favorite dango shack, and suddenly Naruto runs right through and ruins my food. I was pretty damn mad at the time, but the anger went away when I saw a bunch of people running after him with rust-covered weapons and such. It all clicked in my head, and I followed them in the shadows. Unfortunately, I was being too slow, trying to surprise them and all, and Naruto was hurt pretty badly. I was able to run them off and get Naruto patched up. Since then, I stopped by regularly and became like a sister to him. She told Mei, giving her that basic rundown of everything that happened. Also helps that he would pester me every time he saw me around the village, she adds, smiling happily, remembering the time he had inadvertently kept some more lecherous civilians away by pestering her, causing them to think that it might not be a good idea to mess with a fox and snake combo, even if the boy had no training. Mei nodded, so, basically, you were nice to him and he treated you like one would treat most other people who could fall into the anyone category, fair enough. Suddenly a random member of the rebellion came up behind Anko and handed something to her and looking at Anko's questioning look, waved to it, it isn't a headband, being just a rebellion and all, but it'll notify people of your standing in this war and let the other rebels know you're with us. Anko took a look at what had been given to her. It was a pure white porcelain mask with the Kurigakure logo on the center of the forehead. Anko smiled at how blank the mask was, meaning she could make it entirely hers without ever being mistaken for someone else. Thanks. She said as she looked up at Mei. Mei nodded with a smile, if he is in Uzumaki, then there are people here who would want him to stay. If he calls you his sister, then they'll want you to stay as well. She then patted Anko on the shoulder lightly, now, let's see about what the docs have come up with in regards to Naruto and his medical scans and other stuff, she said. Right. Anko nodded and followed Mei a short distance to where Naruto, the doctors, Yuki Onna, and now Zabuza were. He had apparently come in while the two were talking and was holding a few items in his hands, one of them being a shattered mask. One of the doctors walked up to Mei and bowed deeply before taking a glance at Naruto. As far as we can tell, he's going to be alright. The amnesia seemed to have been more than just a hit to the head. Stress, deeply conflicting thoughts and emotions, pure uncertainty. We encountered the presence of foul chakra within him, but Oni-san and Yuki Onna-san explained the boy's status as a jailer for one of the Bijuu, which might have also had some influence on him and his memory loss. Physically, he's completely fine. No signs of damage or wear to anything. Mentally, though, he's showing small signs of progress, like when he vaguely recognized some of the items Oni-san showed to him, but he couldn't tell us anything about them, where they came from, or who had them originally. It's good news, since it tells us his memories aren't lost forever, but we can't be certain about when he'll get them back, or if he gets them all back. He's off and on right now, but he is responding rather well, all things considered. May nodded but saw the doctor hadn't moved yet. Was there anything else? She asked, already fearing the answer from the way the doctor started to move their fingers nervously. The doctor nodded, yes. Well, we don't have much. We were able to compare the samples we took from him against samples from people in the rebellion. Well, he's already unique from the Bijuu inside of him. He's also confirmed to have Uzumaki blood, and a few things we didn't even think of seeing. He paused, making May's eyebrow twitch as a result. Just spit it out, man. She snapped. The doctor nodded and continued hesitantly, we can't be sure of what exactly he has to add on to what I've just stated. We only know that there's more in store for him in the future, he finished, trailing off at the end. May blinked in confusion. So, what? He has additional abilities or something? She asked in confusion. The doctor nodded, pretty much, yes. We don't know what they are, though we can say, someone has been messing with his DNA. May sighed, I assume that you are absolutely sure in what you found. She asked them, making sure that they weren't hiding anything from her. The doctor nodded quickly. I'm sure, May-sama. You may want to give him a chakra test among other things, as me and my colleagues have done all we can with the current amount of resources. May waved the doctor off with a thank you and noticed Anko staring at her weirdly. What? She asked. Anko blinked and shook her head, looking around the room. Oh, nothing. You just seem really involved in all of this. She explained. Shouldn't you be commanding a recon group or something, oh glorious rebellion leader? She asked with a smirk. May shot her a look of annoyance. You can sure be a smartass, sometimes you know that, right? She then sighed and looked at the chart the doctor had given her. He should be evening out in a few minutes. I think Yuki-onna is watching him at the moment, she said, only to be cut off by Anko as she was about to finish speaking. Yuki-onna? Who are they? Anko asked rather suddenly, wondering who the masked ninja was since she already found out Zabuza's alias. May sighed, from what Oni has told me, Yuki-onna apparently knows Naruto. Might not know him as much as you do, but she knows him nonetheless and is actually the person who issued the command to bring him here to Mizuno-kuni. Zabuza had refused to tell her anything about Yuki-onna's identity, simply saying that he had met them during his time away from Kiri. While she was aggravated about it, she didn't pry further into the specifics about who they were. After all, why question someone who was willing to help against a tyrant when they worked with someone like Zabuza? Anko nodded and walked over to the bed where Naruto was. He had a blank expression as he looked up at the ceiling and seemingly didn't notice the fully masked ninja standing at the end of the bed. Yuki-onna had been standing at the foot of the bed since Naruto was placed there, watching over the boy and the doctors checking up on him. When Naruto woke up, she and Zabuza tried to see if he could remember anything. While he couldn't say anything specific about them, he did seem to know about them, and it was progress. As May and Anko walked over to the bed, Yuki-onna turned her head to look at them, her face unable to be seen. Oni-sama left briefly to put the items back in his personal room. Naruto is showing some progress and is proving that he eventually will get his memories back. Anko looked at Yuki-onna, and where exactly is his personal room, as I would like to be nearby, after all, he is my brother, if not by blood, then by spirit and choice, she said, making it clear she would refuse to have her room placed anywhere other than near Naruto's room. Yuki-onna shook her head. You're mistaken. I meant Oni-sama's personal room. Oni-sama left to put away items that he believed Naruto would remember. She paused a moment before nodding. Naruto will be sleeping in a room next to my own, which is set in between his room and Oni-sama's room. You can have the nearest room besides mine and Oni-sama's. It will be in another hallway, she said to Anko before turning her head to look at May. May-sama. You will have the option of choosing your own room. Oni-sama built this place with the assistance of the Demon Brothers as a hideout near Kurigakure, so there are several rooms for you to use. May grinned, making it obvious that she was planning something. I would be sharing a room with Oni, of course. Her grin became lecherous, making it known she had plans for the masked man. Yuki-onna blushed lightly under her mask, thankful that her mask was hiding her face. I see. She said simply. The woman tried to think about what to change topic to and nodded to herself after a minute. We should be moving to the dining room. I don't believe any of us have eaten in a while. The Demon Brothers should be hunting for food for us to eat. She then escorted the two other women out of the room, not noticing that a blonde-haired boy was silently tailing them to also get some food. As they walked through the stone halls, they encountered Zabuza walking through the halls as well. He no longer had the porcelain mask on, but still had the cloth covering over the bottom half of his face. He walked with the group, guiding them to the dining room. Take seats anywhere you like. He told them. The kid's going to take the head of the table. He added, making the others look around to see Naruto walking around quietly to the head of the table. Anko frowned at him as he sat down. He was so unlike his normal self, and it made her feel like the civilians had finally started to get to him, even if it wasn't the case here. It made her feel like she failed in watching out for him. Naruto, she called out to him as she sat down to the left of him. When this rebellion thing is all over, if you still don't have your memories back, we're going to work even harder than we are now to make sure you return to your old self. Naruto just looked at them and shrugged. Okay, guess, he told them blankly. He felt like her words should have had some importance to him, but his lack of memories and personality prevented him from connecting with anyone or anything properly right now. The group had eaten and explained more to Naruto about whom he was and why he was there. While he was thankful for the help, he was still unable to really connect with them. As it got late, everyone decided to turn in for the night, with the exception of the demon brothers, who opted to keep watch around the hideout. Later that night, Anko woke from her sleep. The curse seal on her neck often did that to her, and it had become all but annoying to her. Getting out of the bed she was given, she roamed the halls of Zabuza's base to ease her mind from the terrible dreams she had. As like real life, the dream Naruto had forgotten everything about himself as well, but had begun to treat her poorly and started to become the kind of person that she hated being around. As she walked the halls, she ventured down the hallway that Zabuza, Yuki and Naruto were sleeping in and decided to check up on the boy. Opening his door, she saw the masked woman watching over Naruto at the foot of his bed, much like how she was when he was in the infirmary. Yuki simply watched over him, her face still unable to be seen. Despite this, Anko could tell she was deep in thought and decided to simply leave the room and wander a bit more before heading back to her room to sleep. The next morning, Naruto woke up feeling a nearby presence. As he looked around, he found the masked woman from the day before sleeping next to him, thankfully fully clothed and at least a few good inches away from him. He remembered sleeping in the middle of the bed, so his current position on the side was explained easier because of her presence. "A masked lady?" Naruto asked. He knew that he had heard the name the other masked person, the red-headed woman, and the purple-haired woman used for the woman currently sleeping in his bed, but he was unable to remember it. Something Anna, he remembered. Looking at her masked face, Naruto stared at Yuki for several minutes before deciding to take off the mask to see what the person underneath it looked like. Slowly, Naruto gently grabbed the mask and began to gently pull it off, but was stopped as a hand suddenly grabbed his arm, making him yelp in surprise and jump back a little. Yuki turned her head to look at Naruto, and while unable to see her eyes, he was able to feel the icy cold glare that she shot at him. Thankfully, she stopped glaring at him and let go of his hand before sitting up. The memories of the previous night returned to her and a bright red blush took over her face. Once again, she was thankful for the mask she wore and proceeded to get out of the bed. Once she bowed to Naruto. "My apologies for sharing your bed. I was guarding you throughout the night and eventually became tired," she said to him before quickly stepping out of the room. While Naruto didn't know much about the masked woman, he did know that her voice was at least 2 octaves higher than it was the day before and wondered what she was thinking when she left the room. In the back of his head, Naruto could hear deep laughter. He was sure that it wasn't himself, as he had never heard such a deep and powerful laugh before, and it scared him mildly. Elsewhere, Mei sighed as she thought about how things were going to go. She knew she would have to have Naruto retrained. As right now, without his memories, he useless to the cause without his memories and knowledge of jutsu and tactics. She had been informed that he was good, but was lacking in several areas. She knew that with this opportunity, she could have Naruto trained to be a much better ninja than he was before. Naruto's still in there. At his core, he's still the hyperactive knucklehead that changed a country's future. Zabuza spoke up, appearing behind Mei. "He might not have his memories, but I know that it won't stop him from giving some money to every beggar on every street. It's who he is." Mei smiled, "I sure he is, but until he gets his memories back, he needs to be retrained. Any ideas on what we should teach him?" she asked. Zabuza smiled, "Well, I could teach him Kenjutsu and the silent killing techniques," he said. Mei sighed, "We should ask Anko if she could help, you told me he could use shadow clones. If he could relearn it, that would be very helpful for the cause. More so if Anko knows it too, as then she could teach it to us, making it a new high-level jutsu for future Kirin," she said, smiling as she finished speaking. Zabuza nodded, "You have a point, but at the same time you're off. With how fast that kid was pulling out shadow clones, it seems like he could make them in his sleep. It's all muscle memory to him. Well, he can't remember the jutsu, his body does. He'll know the hand seals. It makes our job just a bit easier as well. More so because of a little bonus to that jutsu," the masked ninja said with a smirk, knowing a little bit about the jutsu, despite not having a sufficient amount of chakra to properly use it himself. Zabuza stepped around Mei and began to walk down one of the hallways. "Let's get going to the camp. As much as I like staying here, we should get moving. I brought a few things with me to give to the kid when we get there. Ao and the demon bothers should already be clearing a path for us," he said as he continued to walk, getting Mei to walk with him to the entrance of the hideout where they would meet up with Anko, Yuki, and Naruto. The group soon met up at the entrance and sealed the hideout again, making sure that only Zabuza and his huge-ass sword can get inside. Once the hideout was locked up, the group moved back into rebellion territory to get going to the main camp of the rebellion. Chapter 3. Light disagreements. Reaching the entrance to the camp, the group was met with the three figures. The two on the sides were slightly taller than the one in the middle. They had on standard Kurigakura Anbu armoring and masks, and the one in the center had a blue striped shirt, a navy blue harness for the sword on his back, camouflage pants, and a pair of ear protectors connected to his glasses. "Mei-sama, you're back," the one in the middle stated, stepping forward and looking over the new people. Almost 2 weeks before, Oni and Yuki entered the rebel camp on their own, without the demon brothers at their side, so it was now them, and a purple-haired woman, and a blonde-haired boy. Ao had been told to stay with Mei, while the glasses-wearing young man watched over the camp. "Yes, and as you can see, the party has gotten a bit bigger over the last few days. Any progress, Chijuro?" Mei responded and asked him, getting him to nod slightly. "We managed to capture another hunter nin trying to spy on us," he told her, looking back at the camp briefly before turning back around. Mei raised an eyebrow and looked at Chijuro seriously. "Did they put up much of a fight to get away?" Slowly, Chijuro shook his head at his leader. "No, Mei-sama. It didn't take much to pin him down and bring him underground." The Redeed was quiet for a moment, thinking over the situation. "Bring me to him. He's a hunter nin, they shouldn't be easy to capture." Juro nodded and turned around, walking into the camp. The other two ninjas stepped aside and allowed them to go inside. As they walked, Mei looked at Yuki, who had been carrying Naruto since they had left Zabuza's base. She had struggled slightly, but Zabuza had told her that Yuki was not in the best condition and needed a little more time to heal all the way. "Oni, take Naruto to the medical tent, see if we can't give him a better evaluation," she told them before looking at Anko, who looked back at her. "You can come with me, or with them. Since you're into interrogation and all that, maybe you can have fun with this guy." A small smile appeared on her face and another one appearing on Anko's face as well as she understood what she was saying, however, Anko's smile was much more sadistic. "Of course, Mei," she said, grinning now, "cracking open minds like walnuts is one of my favorite pastimes, but don't freak out if you hear yelling, screaming, or manic laughter. My techniques are special," she ended with a sweet smile, getting Mei to sigh and shake her head with a smile. "Alright then, you're with us," she replied, continuing to walk as the demon brothers, Zabuza, and Yuki branched off from them to go elsewhere. "I'm Anko," she spoke suddenly, getting the attention of Chijuro. "That sword, you're like Oni?" The young man nodded and smiled slightly. "Chijuro," he replied simply. "And yes, I'm also one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist." He put his focus back to the task at hand and led the two to an underground bunker where they held their prisoners as to not allow them to know where they were. Once they were at the cell, Chijuro motioned for the two to enter the cell in which their most recent prisoner was in. The two walked into the cell and the door was shut behind them, leaving them with an unmasked hunter nin woman chained and cuffed for security. Anko was about to go ahead and get started but was stopped by Mei, who held her arm out in front of him. "I have a few questions first," she told Anko, getting the purple-haired woman to nod and take a step back. Mei walked towards the hunter nin and looked at her coolly. "I've already sent back the people Yugura sent to get me to give up with my own message. He doesn't need to do it anymore," Mei said calmly, getting the woman to nod and look at her with her dark blue eyes. "That's not at this time. He wants you to know that you're going to get the war you've been asking for. He wants to end your rebellion." The hunter nin replied in an equally calm voice. "He's expecting you to end my life like you did with the other messages. I know ins and outs. I can help." She was just as calm as before, but both Anko and Mei were able to pick up on the undertone that she was using. "Why?" Anko asked, raising an eyebrow at the woman. The hunter nin knew what she was getting at and nodded, looking down in slight shame. "I'll spare you the backstory. I don't cut the heads off of my targets. In training, yes, it's only a dummy, but never a real person." "So, what?" Anko asked. "You're a hunter nin in sheep's clothing, then?" She arched her eyebrow in curiosity, trying to figure this woman out. "The other way around," she replied sadly. "I was forced into the hunter nin program. I have an affinity for some things and Yugura wanted to capitalize on them. I'm not a killer. I'm not a kunoichi. A defective tool from the start." Whiskers would go apeshit over this if he heard that. Anko sighed, putting her hand over her face. Mei remained quiet for several minutes before walking to the door. Chijuro stood at the door as vigilant as ever. Mei opened the door and looked at him, just turning around to see what was going on. Mei pointed to the bound woman behind her and took a glance for good measure. "Get the warden and find her some clothes." She's free to stay in the camp until things die down. Anko, meanwhile, looked at the female hunter nin in the room, her light blue hair drawing the attention of the two women in the room. So. She stated as Juro undid her bindings. What's your name? Nariko. She replied quietly. Anko raised an eyebrow, no last name. She asked as she watched the hunter nin take off her mask only for Anko to look at her in surprise. Wait a minute, she gasped, you can't be more than a year or two younger than I am. She exclaimed. Both Nariko and Mei shot the other woman a look, both silently telling her that it wasn't the time. So what's your story? Mei asked, curious about how this woman was forced into the hunter nin program. Nariko nodded and looked down. I was born in Kusagakure. My abilities were frowned upon and I was an outcast. She told them, moved her arms around as she was unbound from the chair. Then, a man came into the village and killed everyone. He was interested in me because of what I had and I was interested in him because of his power. He offered to take me away from Kusa and I accepted. He took me across the elemental nations in only a few days and when we came to Mizu no Kuni, he asked something of me. I couldn't do it so he abandoned me. I was found by the Anbu and they brought me to Yagura. He forced me to be in the hunter nin program but as you can see, it didn't last. She explained to them, standing up and bowing to Mei. I will be in your debt, I don't want to die. Anko felt like she could connect with her. They were both outcasts, found by a man who promised them great things and was later on abandoned by them. I'll give her a vote. I know what it's like to be in that situation and she shouldn't die because she's being forced to do something she doesn't want to do. Mei nodded. Good. She said to Anko. Because I was planning on letting her live, with or without your say-so. Oh, and you're going to be watching her until I tell you otherwise. You can prove to me that she can be trusted and that you can be trusted as well. Anko blinked in surprise and confusion for a moment. Me? She asked in surprise. Sure, I guess I can watch her, but what exactly will our little group be, exactly, if I might ask? She asked, still confused about exactly what the group Mei was building would be, since it now seemed that it would be Anko, Yuki, Zabuza, Naruto, and Nariko, once Naruto got his memory back that is, or was retrained properly. It'll be whatever it needs to be. At the moment, you and the demon brothers are the only ones able to fight. Oni and Ana are damaged and still need time to heal, and Naruto is still without his memories. About that Anko replied, will Naruto be getting trained by Zabuza? She asked. Mei shrugged. It's a possibility. He can't train the kid firsthand at the moment, it still takes some effort to lift up his sword. Well, Anko replied, he can still use water clones, right? She asked. Yes, but his physical status would still be the same. His arms are almost shot, Anko. He needs some more time to heal. Well, Anko said, trying to think about a solution, well, you could have me and Nariko here teach him what we know, with Zabuza providing training through us by telling us what we need to do, then teaching that to Naruto. She suggested, after all, he could just tell us what hand signs we need for any jutsu he knows, then we show it to Naruto and teach him those, she finished. Mei thought about it and was about to speak before the other woman in the room interrupted her. I'm sorry, but I can't do that. I just want a peaceful life. I don't want to worry about training children to be killers. She said to them. Anko pinched the bridge of her nose, you say you do not want to die and to be of use to the rebellion, she countered, if you do not fight, then how do you intend to help out the rebellion? Surely you know a few tricks you could pass on to others, she finished. I did not say I wanted to be used to teach people how to kill others. Nariko said back rather coldly. I told you that I can help with easy access points and weaknesses in the Mizukage's defense. Anko grinned, now that she had an angle she could use Nariko for. Great, that means you could teach my little brother about being subtle, you know, stealth stuff. Kami no he needs it if he gets his memories back she said, mumbling the last part. No assassination techniques. Stealth only. Nariko replied seriously. Anko shrugged, I can live with that, she said, finishing with a grin, forgetting that Mei was there and had been left out of the conversation that just took place. Ease up on her, Anko. She wants to help and information is enough. Yuki can help with stealth. Mei said to Anko before looking at Nariko. She's a little crazy, don't mind her. You're to stay around in the camp until this war is over, though, so enjoy yourself as much as you can. Anko pouted, spoil my fun. She tried to say cutely, well, I can still tease her though. She said happily. The blue-haired woman bowed again. Thank you, and I don't think I ever got your name. She spoke to Mei. Mei Terumi. The rebel leader replied simply. She bowed once more, making a point to have everyone know that she was truly thankful for being freed. Thank you, Mei-sama. I should be getting settled. As the woman walked out of the room, Mei nodded back to her. Take care. In the medical tent, Yuki and Zabuza watched as the doctors performed another full checkup on Naruto, both mental and physical. The results weren't much more than they already knew, but it was slightly more in depth now. The two masked ninjas simply watched as the doctors finished up, but one could easily tell that the other was worried. Zabuza smiled and chuckled. Anna. He's going to be fine and better than before. He has no idea how important he is. We both know it's possible he might not get past this point in his recovery. The masked woman responded. A hint of worry was hidden in her voice as she spoke. Zabuza sighed, putting a hand on Yuki Anna's shoulder. He's going to be fine. We both know what he has inside, and he's also one of those Uzumaki. He's going to make it out of this fine. He told her reassuringly, a faint smile able to be seen from the crease in his mask. It soon turned into a smirk as he continued. But if he doesn't, he could always be reminded. He chuckled as he finished speaking. If it weren't for the mask, everyone in the camp would have been able to see the deep blush that overcame Yuki Anna's face. Zabuza-sama. She said in a surprised tone of voice. He does not need to be reminded of anything. She was still blushing under her mask, and the slight things that Zabuza picked up told him that she was embarrassed and slightly uncomfortable. Zabuza grinned. Well, he began, I do recall a certain kiss that I had to pull a certain someone away from in order to keep secrecy, he said, trailing off at the end, while giving a meaningful look to Yuki Anna. Yuki Anna looked down. It was quick, and he most likely doesn't remember it. She spoke quickly. He's still confused as to if Haku was a boy or a girl. Anko suddenly spoke up from behind Yuki Anna, having entered the tent unseen sometime during their discussion. So, you're the one that kissed him, huh? She asked, smirking with a triumphant look on her face. And no, but I was in the area. Yuki Anna responded quietly. Anko didn't look convinced as she kept smirking at Yuki Anna. Sure you weren't, she said, then she decided to, in a sense, pull the rabbit out of a hat, as it were. Naruto said he was kissed by a very beautiful woman during the Wave Festival of Hope. She said, sure that her next words would get a reaction out of the girl, as she was going to use a trick of interrogation that she loved. I think Naruto said he tried to track her down, and he eventually found her. What was her name again? Anko asked herself aloud as she took on a thoughtful pose and look. Hanano was it was Lano no, that was that girl I met on my last mission's name. Boy was she fun. Ooh oh, I remember now. I believe he told me the woman's name was Fragina, she said, smirking and giving the look of a triumphant victory at having successfully remembered the woman's name, which was also the name she had come up with on the spot, but with no way to tell if she was lying or not. She always did love screwing with people's minds, just not in the same way as Ibiki did. She was also hoping that her little mention about relations with a woman on her last mission would get Zabuza's attention and possibly cause the reaction she was hoping for. Smirking, Zabuza decided to step in before Yuki Anna passed out of embarrassment. The woman never revealed her face to Naruto. Just pulled the mask up enough to give him a quick kiss, then I pulled her away to let Naruto have some time to himself. Meanwhile, Yuki Anna was stone still as she processed the joke that Anko had played on her. A radiating heat could almost be felt as she continued to blush. Anko shot Zabuza a dirty look while Yuki Anna was distracted by Anko's words, before saying, to keep up her trick, nope, Naruto told me, he met a Fragina in Wave, and she told him it was her who kissed him, she said with so much seriousness you couldn't tell if she was joking or being 100% serious. Yuki Anna couldn't believe that Anko was still going with this sick and highly perverted joke. She shook her head and did her best to calm herself down. No, I was close enough to hear the conversation. Only Naruto's name was used. Nothing of what you said. Anko smirked inwardly, seeing that she was getting to Yuki Anna, and you really think he wouldn't try and find the first woman to ever kiss him the following day? She asked, arching an eyebrow, while keeping up her serious face and tone of voice that she had mastered through her years as an interrogation expert. Zabuza spoke up to keep the heat off of his partner. I pulled her away, remember? I moved her out of the village. Turns out she wasn't even from there, but just a visitor that just happened to get caught up in Gato and Wave's crossfire. Naruto didn't find her. Anko put a finger to the side of her face as she took on a thinking position. Then who is woman that Naruto told me he met? She asked still with seriousness, but also with a tone of wonder and curiosity in her voice. Obviously your alias. Yuki Anna spoke coolly, her mask tilted downward slightly. Anko gasped in horror and disgust. Are you implying that I would try and seduce my little brother? She asked threateningly, genuinely angry at that insinuation. The masked woman remained still, doing her best to keep cool in the situation. Everything about you suggests it. The clothing, the attitude, your attention to him, your perverted jokes. Nobody here would be surprised. Anko actually let out a snake-like hiss of anger now. I dress the way I do, so that I distract my enemies. I mean, come on, I was the sexiest kunoichi in Konoha. Gotta use my talents, she replied, and sure I love perverted jokes, causes great reactions in prudes, she added, but I would never sleep with my little brother Naruto. In fact, there have been times where I have had to save his virginity from filthy civilian women who tried to take advantage of him when he was younger. She finished while shouting a bit, all the while not realizing what she had started, as a way of trying to get Yuki to admit she was this Haku Naruto had told her he had met, but also the woman who had kissed him, and it had now turned into an argument about her lifestyle choices. Yuki shook her head, her mask facing Anko. Don't lie to defend yourself. She spoke rather coldly. I'm aware of the hatred that Konoha holds for him. Your so-called talents seem to be more refined than your morale, and the only reason you're still here is because Mei-sama knows that you're an asset to bringing Naruto's memories back. Anko growled deep down in her throat in anger, and before anyone could react, she launched herself at Yuki and slugged her in the gut, causing the masked woman to groan in pain and hold her stomach afterwards, while having some trouble breathing. I care about Naruto as if he was my biological little brother, don't mistake my lifestyle choices for trying to seduce him. The last thing I would want is to hurt the only person in Konoha who can relate to what I have gone through in that stupid ignorant village, and I am the only one in that village who can relate to what he has gone through. She shouted back as she then stood up, her fists still clenched as she then added, and, fine, I will admit, you're good at counter-interrogation, as I was trying to see if you were the woman who kissed Naruto or not, after all, a big sister does have to look out for her little brother by trying to find out about any woman he becomes interested in, she said, before pausing and taking a calming breath before shooting a glare at Yuki. Nothing says I can't have a bit of fun during my questioning though, so, if you took offense to my little dirty jokes, that's your fault, not mine, but never question about how much I care about my little brother. She finished with a nasty hiss as she stormed out of the tent, violently shoving anyone in her way out of the way as she went, not caring if they hit someone or one of the other's patients or some of the equipment. After Anko stormed out, Zabuza looked at Yuki with a rather bland expression. That was a little much, you know. He told her. Yuki nodded, coughing before speaking. Maybe so. But buttons need to be pushed in order to see the truth. She'll be a fine addition to the new Kiri Shinobi Corps. Yeah. Zabuza said rather dryly. But you do know that you're going to have to apologize eventually. She seems like the kind to hold a grudge. The masked woman nodded looking at Naruto. Of course. What I said no doubt set her off, and I should do it soon so this doesn't fester into something worse. Zabuza grimaced at that, then methinks you should wait till later in the day, then Anna, he said, looking at her with concern. She nodded once more, understanding why waiting would be the wisest choice to handle the situation. That was how I was planning on doing it, Zabuza-sama. Zabuza nodded, glad that Yuki was able to realize the wisdom of waiting a few hours. Meanwhile, Anko stormed out of the tent, grumbling and muttering under her breath all the curses in the various languages she had been taught years earlier, and planning the various ways in her head that she could get back at Yuki without causing permanent harm. So far, several of her plans involved painful and shameful accidents caused by poisons affecting her at inopportune times, by activating at certain times of the day specifically. As she stomped along, she gained the attention of Mei, who had been setting up Nariko with things to help her live more comfortably at the camp. The red-haired woman was just finishing up her conversation and pardoned herself before catching up with Anko. What's got you all like this? The rebel leader asked, keeping in step with Anko's quick stomping. Anko's response was to shoot her a glare of death of massive intensity, before continuing to stomp off towards where she had been told she would be staying. Mei grunted and followed her, waiting until Anko made her way to her tent before speaking. Anko. What's up? She asked in a rather serious tone. Anko sighed, me and Yuki had a disagreement, I guess you could say, then she insulted me, so I slugged her in the stomach before storming off. Now I'm here in my tent to make samir mixture, she said, trailing off at the end. The older woman couldn't help but to laugh lightly at what Anko had told her. Really? She asked tauntingly. You think she hates you or something? I don't know her all that much, but I'm sure she doesn't hold anything against you. Anko turned to glare at Mei with a low hiss, that bitch, Anko began, trying to stay calm as she recalled the events of a few moments earlier, insinuated that just because of my life choices and choice of dress, that I would try and seduce me little brother. She said, her anger starting to grow again. She just wanted to know where your allegiance truly lies, even if she had a harsh way of going about it. It's obvious that she cares for Naruto just as much as you do. Mei spoke in an offhanded tone. She just wants to make sure you aren't using him as a scapegoat. Anko glared at Mei as she hissed her response with rage. I have nothing to prove. If you feel the need to test my loyalty to someone who is willing to really help my little brother, then you do not know a damn fucking thing about me. She said, then she took a few deep calming breaths and looked at Mei. Tell that little ice bitch to watch her back, she wants to test me. I will give her the scariest fucking test of her life as a response before I will let her near my little brother, she said with such seriousness, it left little doubt that she was planning something truly frightening now. Something that would truly no doubt test Yuki-ana's resolve and love for her brother. It also didn't help that Anko's face contorted into one fueled by a scary rage as she thought of how much fun it would be to mess with a little girl. Even to another woman, hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn. Sighing, May walked out of the room, knowing that Anko was too hot to handle at the moment and needed some time to calm down before she could be approachable. She was rather surprised that Anko didn't catch what Yuki Onna was getting at. She was supposed to be a master interrogator and should be able to cut away the unneeded harshness to find out what she was really saying. All throughout the rest of the afternoon and into the early evening, Anko planned. She brewed various poisons, but none of them really seems to fit what she had in mind for them, and so she continued making them into the early evening. All the while, her anger slowly trickled away, but still, she was unable to focus on anything than her perceived revenge for that woman, insinuating that she would try and seduce her little brother. While she was making herself busy by brewing toxins and poisons specifically for the masked woman, Anko made time to spend her dinner with Naruto in the tent that he had been given. It was near May's tent as he was meant to be their secret weapon before he had amnesia, and so he was supposed to be in close proximity to May at almost all times. The next day, Yuki Onna made her way to Naruto's tent, wanting to start on her portion of his training. Zabuza would start training soon, and she knew this, so she just had to prepare him for the worst. Anko was sleeping at Naruto's bedside, having fallen asleep while watching him. She had been hoping that he would remember her, even a little, and so was not aware that her target of anger was fast approaching her brother's tent. The masked woman moved the loose fabric to gain access to the tent and stopped immediately as soon as she saw Anko sleeping near Naruto. She was still walking on eggshells because of her miscalculation of how well Anko would be able to see through her mean words, and she was actually sorry about pressing so much on an apparently sore spot. Yuki Onna then turned around and walked out of the tent. Anko grumbled a bit in her sleep, mumbling about ice women, pranks, revenge, and concern for Naruto, not aware that Yuki Onna could hear her. As an idea popped into her mind, Yuki Onna stopped and turned back around heading into the tent and waiting patiently for them to wake up. Anko suddenly snorted as she woke up and then looked at the bed drowsily. Seeing that Naruto was still asleep, she smiled slightly, but in a sad manner. "I'm sorry that I am responsible for you losing your memories, little brother," she said, brushing some of his hair out of the way of his face before she sighed. "I'm not sure about Yuki Onna, Naruto," she said, more to herself than Naruto even though she was speaking aloud. "I mean, May's alright, Zabuza is cute," she said, blushing a bit as she admitted that to herself. "I honestly want to make this the best situation for the two of us. After all, neither of us are well liked in Konoha, you because of the fox, and me because of who trained me," she said, tailing off at the end as she shed a tear from her eye at remembering all the bad things that had happened to both her and Naruto back in Konoha. Anko's talking to Naruto was more about helping her clear her thoughts than actually having him listen to her, which was not much since he was asleep. Normally Anko would never speak so openly, but, as far as she knew, she was alone with Naruto, and he was asleep. Yuki Onna stayed quiet as she listened to Anko. She still didn't move and waiting for Anko to eventually take notice of her. Anko sighed, "You know Naruto, as your big sister, I always gotta make sure that whoever captures your heart is being honest and truly cares for you, especially after that one incident," she said, remembering that one young girl who had arranged a date with Naruto only for it to actually end horribly for him. While she was curious about what the incident was, the masked woman remained silent, wanting for Anko to find her instead of revealing herself. She believed that it was a better way to go about it, but when she really thought about it, neither of the options were really the best way to handle the situation. Despite this, she stayed still and listened. Anko sighed, "I know I am not the best big sister for you, Naruto, but I do try, in my own way." She grinned softly. Still, she changed from a grin to a smile. "I can tell that, when you're older, you're going to have lots of women after you. After all, well, you're adorable now, you will no doubt be handsome later," she said, thinking of how she will have to protect her little brother's chastity in the future. A small smile made its way to Yuki Onna's face. She was just as sure as Anko that Naruto would grow up to be a handsome young man one day. Imagining an older Naruto, the masked woman sighed and began to lose herself in her thoughts, forgetting why she was still there in the first place. Hearing a soft sigh from behind her, Anko was immediately on alert and withdrew 2 kunai from her sleeves as she spun around, whipping the kunai through the air as she turned to face who she thought was there to attack her. Upon seeing Anko move, Yuki Onna stood still, watching as Anko prepared herself to either slice her throat open or lodge the throwing knife into her masked head. "Morning," she said simply, her head tilting to the side ever so lightly as she looked at the snake mistress. Anko's response was to glare back dangerously and not saying anything, making it very clear she was not in a greeting manner. "If you're going to do something, then do it now. It's clear that I pushed too far, but I needed to know where your allegiances were." Yuki Onna explained herself, still unmoving and unwavering. "What I said was rude and terrible, but sometimes the only way to get what one wants is the worst way." Her eyes moved to Naruto, who was still asleep and resting quietly. Her hands moved up to her mask, just slow enough to that Anko would understand what she was doing. Only Zabuza-sama knows who I really am, but as a way to apologize, I'm going to allow you to be the second person here that remembers my face. Anko softened her stance, but only by a little, as she nodded, but was still alert just in case it was a trick. Just so you know, I apologize for my little bit of interrogation as well, Anko said, but a big sister does have to look out for her little brother's heart, you understand, especially with what he has gone through, she finished, trailing off at the end. Yuki pulled the mask off for the first time, and what was quite some time to her. She and Zabuza had agreed that she was to keep the mask on until after the Civil War, but she knew that she had to break the deal just this one time. Her face was revealed to Anko, and the woman glanced at Naruto once more. Yes, and he's going to be quite the catch in the future. He's cute now, but we both know he'll turn out to be handsome. Anko immediately glared while blushing. How much did you?" she stammered before trailing off, cursing herself for stuttering in front of the younger woman before her. Yuki let out a small laugh and put the mask back on, shaking her head as she assured herself that it would stay on. "Since you started speaking." The masked woman then sniffed the air and looked around. She hummed to herself and continued to smell the air. "What an unusual scent," she said rather nonchalantly. "Almost like mixed chemicals." Anko sighed and then, lowering her weapon, shot a glare at Yuki. "I hope you know, if you tell anyone about what I said." She then took a step forward threateningly. "I will gut you and hide your body in the deepest darkest chasm I can find," she threatened. Yuki nodded and placed a hand on the lower half of her mask, pretending as if a zipper and a lock were there. "Under lock and key," she replied, putting her hand back down to her side. Anko nodded and relaxed her pose into a more relaxed one. "Good, also, I wouldn't recommend eating the sweets that were left in your tent after you left it this morning," Anko said, looking away now with a hint of shame to both her face and her tone. The masked woman nodded, turning her head and glancing outside. "I know. The treats you left me have the same lingering smell." If her mask wasn't there, a smirk could be seen on her face. Anko smiled sheepishly. "Actually, I meant all the sweets in your tent, as only some of them still smelled of the various chemicals I used, to throw you off some of them, but not suspect the rest," she said, rubbing the back of her head. "Anyway, I think we should talk plainly and just cut the crap," she sighed. "Are you Haku, and the one who kissed my brother at the festival?" she asked. "I have to know because, as his big sister, I can't allow someone to play with his heart," said, trailing off at the end. Yuki was quiet for a moment, collecting her thoughts and mentally preparing herself. Haku's state is unknown. The demon brothers found Zabuza and Haku on the bridge, and Zabuza has yet to reveal if he is alive or not. I was contacted by Zabuza afterwards, and we met up the night of the festival. Anko grinned. "Now I know you're partially lying," Anko said, continuing to grin. "After all, I figured out who Oni was pretty quick back at that last base," she said, crossing her hands over her chest triumphantly. "Oni's appearance is more distinguishable than mine," Yuki replied. "I change masks, he doesn't." Anko smiled. Sure," she said, then sighed. "Well, in any case, since you and Zabuza know who kissed Naruto, do me a favor, would you?" she asked, being suspiciously easygoing at the moment. "We don't know who kissed him. Zabuza-sama escorted them away," she replied, making it clear for Anko that it was just some person. "But what would that favor be?" Anko waved her off. Yeah, whatever," she said carelessly. "My favor is this, if she decides to be with Naruto after meeting up with him again," and suddenly Anko's careless smile turned vicious, "tell her that, if she ever breaks my little brother's heart, I will bury her." Anko stood up straight. "No, I mean it, I will get out some earth jutsu, dig a massive hole, incapacitate her, and then dump in the hole before covering it with earth jutsu, and then crushing it with one of my larger summons," she said, making it very clear, "hurt her brother, and you're toast." "We don't know her, Anko," Yuki replied rather seriously. "It was just some woman in Wave, and we won't be returning there for some time." She paused, allowing the information to sink into Anko's mind. "On the off chance we do encounter her again, it will be made known. But it won't happen anytime soon." Anko suddenly changed from her dark and scary stance to happy and smiling. "Good, that's all I ask you to do," she said, grinning now. "Of course, should she be genuine about her feelings and not ever break my brother's heart." Here she went from grinning to smiling. "I would have no problem with that, after all, he deserves someone who truly cares about him." She smiled as she turned to look at Naruto now. "Oh, and in case you're wondering," she said, looking back at Yuki, "I ended up falling asleep here because Naruto was apparently having nightmares," she said, suddenly going serious. "Nightmares?" Yuki echoed, her head tilted ever so slightly to the left as she looked at Anko. Anko nodded, looking serious as he looked at Naruto and brushed some more hair off his face. "Yeah." He was also mumbling a bit, she sighed, trying to see if she could piece together anything from what she had heard. "It sounds like nonsense, but dreams and nightmares have meaning." Yuki nodded. She was well aware that dreams were the doorway into the subconscious, and they could often provide information of what one really wants. Anko sighed, in this case though, that meaning is not promising, she said. She shook her head at Anko, agreeing with her up to a point. Maybe so, but nightmares can't be made from nothing. Anko smiled and nodded. You're right. She stated with a smirk. When he was sleeping, he was muttering, moving around, pleading even. Yuki nodded, knowing that they were both starting to understand his situation. If only we could monitor his dreams, we'd have a better idea about what is happening with him. Anko sighed, the only way that could be achieved is if we had one of the Yamanaka or someone with similar ability, she said sadly, trailing off at the end. After all, Yamanaka were very loyal to the leaf, finding a cast-out member was next to impossible. Unfortunately, I am not aware of any clan or person in the land of mist that can peer into the minds of others. Yuki bowed and apologized. Anko waved it off, nothing to worry about, I am just saying that the Yamanaka clan was known to have mind healers and mind walkers, some specializing in both fields. It's just a pity they are all in Konoha. She replied. Yuki shook her head, her mask facing Naruto. We don't have any clans in Kiri like them. We'll just have to monitor him closely to see what's going on. Anko nodded, well, as his big sister, I intend to stay close to him, unless May has me go on a mission, then I'm not sure who I will ask to watch him for me while I am gone, she sighed. Yuki bowed once again. I'm sure he will be in good hands when you are gone. Anko sighed, me and Naruto aren't in our home village anymore. Trust is hard to earn, especially with how we grew up. Her words made Yuki nod in understanding. While not exactly the same, there were enough similarities to make a connection. I understand. As you know, the Kekkei Genkai users here are hated, even if they are in the family line, but don't have it, they are hated for what they could bring unto their children. Anko smiled, but it was one of understanding, hated for association, right? She replied. In a way. She replied, nodding her head only slightly. But even if they themselves can't access their Kekkei Genkai, it doesn't mean that it can't be passed down to their children. Naruto's children will not have his tailed beast, but there is the chance that any children you may have will have the same reputation in Konoha as you do. Anko shot a small glare at Yuki. I get being hated for association. It starts out just like that, but it seeps into your reputation, and your entire family line could be hated from that point onward. She cast a glance at Naruto, who was still sleeping peacefully in his bed. Poor kid doesn't know a single thing about his parents. I don't think anyone does. She finished. Of course at least one person, one specific person, who sat up in a tower on a plush chair every day in a robe and hat with a magical, all-seeing orb, would know. It's unfortunate. Yuki replied. Since you and Naruto are no longer in Konoha, it may take even longer to find out his heritage. Anko nodded, like me, he doesn't know who is family and who isn't, she said, we're both orphans, she finished, trailing off at the end. Terribly sorry. She spoke with a bow of her head. I was forced to leave my home at a young age, and while I knew my parents, I didn't know them like that. Anko smiled sadly, at least you knew your parents, and that they loved you, at one point or another, she replied, we don't even have that much, she said. It's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. Yuki replied quietly, remembering how her own mother reacted when she had first shown her ability. Anko smiled sadly, yeah. I hear having parents is nice. She laughed a hollow laugh, looking down at the ground. As a child and teen, she always dreamed of finding her parents' identities, wanting them to be legendary ninja in their own rights. However, things didn't go as planned, and that dream was replaced with a burning desire to get revenge upon her former sensei. She could only hope that she and Naruto would have a better life in Kiri than in Konoha. Before Yuki was able to reply, she heard a quiet, drawn-out groan. She recognized it as Naruto and looked at the boy as he stretched and sat up lazily. The two went quiet, both looking at Naruto, who looked back at them with a tired expression. Mask lady? He asked her, getting her to nod. Yes. She said in response, looking at him from under her mask. What's your face look like? I never saw it before. Naruto said back to her, making the woman laugh a familiar laugh, had he not lost his memory. Just like any other face, Naruto. She replied, laughing a bit. Naruto tilted his head to the side curiously, I am sure you're very pretty underneath that mask, he said innocently. Anko covered her mouth as she snorted, trying not to laugh, her snort of amusement causing Naruto to turn to her. Anko right? He asked, trying to remember her name. Yes, it's Anko, Naruto, she said, walking forward and hugging him. I am sure that if I had my memories I would know why you're hugging me, but please, to help me remember, why are you hugging me? He asked. Anko smiled, cause, you're my little brother, she said, well, not by blood, but I have helped look after you, trained you, protected you, cared for you, ever since you were 6 years old, she said smiling while continuing to hug him. I had some nightmares last night, Naruto replied, but they went away after you, or some lady who looked like you, came up and bandaged me up. Did you do that? He said questioningly, obviously trying to remember everything he dreamt better. Anko could see that it was obvious that these nightmares or dreams were reaching into the memories that he couldn't access on his own. Unfortunately, there had been more than one occasion where she had picked him up and wrapped him in bandages, so even she had difficult placing it to a specific memory. Yeah, but it's happened more than a few times. Anko shrugged, wondering if it was just a dream of something more. Naruto tilted his head to the side. Wait, he said slowly, you're saying that nightmare was suddenly he began to shake slowly, then more and more and more, before he was convulsively shaking. Hey. Anko spoke rather stiffly, looking at the boy with concern. Yuki Anno also seemed concerned, but did not move closer to Naruto like Anko did. Hey. She spoke once again, wrapping her arms around him and holding him closely. It's going to be alright. You didn't do anything wrong and you're safe here. It's going to be okay. She held him close and rocked him back and forth while whispering calming words to him as he continued to shake. In time, Yuki Anno joined Anko in comforting Naruto, but said little and just held him and rocked along with Anko to calm the boy down. All the while, all Naruto kept repeating as he shook and convulsed was, what did I do wrong, why would they try and kill me? Anko shook her head and held him tightly. You didn't do anything, Naruto. They don't understand what you can do and they didn't even try. It's okay. Anko watched as Naruto continued to shake. In time, he did stop. It had taken an hour of their constant efforts to put him to rest. He was just about to thank them for helping him before he drifted to sleep in their arms, and the two women thought it was a rather cute moment in front of them. They had stayed with him for another half hour before setting him down on his bed and leaving. Anko walked away from the tent without any words for the masked woman and proceeded to spend the rest of the day keeping her skills intact. Naruto ran. He was unaware that he could run as fast as he did, but it didn't matter. He wasn't fast enough. Zabuza, though injured, could still easily catch him. His balance was off, he was far too slow for his own liking, and he could hardly perform any evasive maneuvers with a large sword strapped on his back. It was a spectacle to see Zabuza's blade on Naruto's back, despite it being at least twice, if not 3 times, his height. He could just barely start off in a sprint, but he did consider himself lucky. Early in the morning when Zabuza began his training, he had told Naruto that if it hadn't been for the current lack of resources, he would have attached cinder blocks to Naruto instead of his sword. Zabuza had found a weighted uniform similar to the Hunter Nin outfit that was a little bigger than Naruto was. It was loose and constantly shifting, but Zabuza assumed that he would grow into it in time. The uniform looked to be the same as that which the Hunter Nin wore. There was nothing that truly stood out about it. It had the armored top, the black shirt and pants, and scandals. Despite how similar it was baggy and large for a reason. It was filled with what Naruto assumed to be sand or something similar. Probably from a beach, Naruto guessed. The weighted clothing and sword combined weighed down Naruto quite a bit and prevented him from moving at a fraction of what he was capable of without them. Faster. Naruto could hear Zabuza shouting at him from behind. He was getting closer and closer with every passing second, and the armored boy wished he could break out of the weighted clothing and make a break for it. I'm catching up. Naruto could hear his teacher from behind him once again. While Zabuza did not have the strength in his arms back to full capacity, his legs were fully operational and wanting to test the limits of his body with his current status. Yuki Anno had to help Naruto to get the Kubikirabacho on and even needed to rig a harness to keep it from dragging across the ground, which would have slowed Naruto down even more. Naruto continued to run, despite the outcome of being captured being inevitable. They had ran around the outskirts of the rebel camp for most of the morning, not wanting to interfere with people's jobs, but still be close to the camp to avoid detection. Rather suddenly, Naruto started to drift to the right. There was a forest nearby, and it was possible Naruto could kill some time there. Zabuza watched Naruto as he began to drift farther and farther away from the camp and closer to a forest. He smirked. It was about time that the boy decided to shake things up, and while he was ahead of the gun, Zabuza decided to stay back and simply follow Naruto instead of trying to run him down straight away. It all happened in an instant. Naruto approached the edge of the forest and latched onto a small tree with one arm, swinging himself 90 degrees to the right and directly into the forest. To keep himself from getting splinters as well as to not lose his grip on the tree, Naruto infused chakra into his hand like Anko had been teaching him the last few days after his secessions with Zabuza. Zabuza said that he would touch on chakra more later on, but taught Naruto just enough to make him useful for the time being, though he didn't know that Anko had been playing big sister tutor as well. Zabuza continued to follow. It was a neat and unconventional trick, as he could have just jumped on a tree and redirected himself to the right, but Naruto's choice in redirection of movement was smart. He never once stopped to change course, but instead weaved through the trees as fluidly as he could. It was remarkable to say the least, but Zabuza kept his thoughts to himself and continued to chase after the boy. The thought stuck Zabuza as he chased Naruto. He was weaving left and right all too smoothly. He latched onto nearby objects to propel himself in different directions, and his stance was too front forward. He stopped suddenly in realization and watched Naruto run and jump around him in circles. He wasn't moving around and redirecting himself like a stream of water. No, he was snaking around. He made a mental note to have a little discussion with Anko later on in the day and maybe a little scolding as well. Come on. Let's go, I thought you were chasing me. Naruto laughed and taunted as he ran circles around Zabuza. Zabuza let out a grunt and watched as the boy continued to run around in circles. You want to chase? He asked the boy, his features twisting into a smirk and his body crouching down. I'll give you a chase. It was at that moment Naruto knew he was screwed. Zabuza launched into motion and chased after Naruto. Naruto continued to run away from Zabuza. He could tell by the older man's expression that he was now going to get serious about the training. The look on Zabuza's face made Naruto fear for his life, and in a spark of memory, his hands formed together and Naruto shouted as loud as he could. Shadow Clone Jutsu. He called to the heavens, creating 15 clones which all ran next to him before shuffling amongst one another and scrambling in all different directions. Zabuza's eyes widened as he watched the sight before it. The last time he had seen that technique was at the bridge in Wave. His smirk faded away and was replaced with a genuine smile. He was improving, he was remembering. Naruto sat tied to a post between two others. The scene seemed familiar to him, but he couldn't make out any specific details about it. Instead, he looked ahead to see his trio of mentors, with Anko and Yuki to the left and right of Zabuza respectively. He huffed in annoyance. This seems familiar to me, but for the life of me, I have no idea why, he said with a tinge of resignation in his voice. Anyway, what now? He asked, looking more at his big sister, Anko, than Zabuza. Anko shrugged and looked around passively, sneaking a glance at Zabuza. Don't know, but I'm feeling a little hungry. She said coyly, getting Zabuza to smirk and pull out 3 lunch boxes. The masked man handed one out to Anko and Yuki each, keeping the third and final one to himself. I agree. He told Anko as he opened his box. Well, no time like the present. He then proceeded to eat his lunch along with Anko and Anna, who had turned around and slid her mask up just enough to eat, but not enough to reveal her face. That would get Naruto to remember something. Chapter 4. Secrets, Strangers, and Strategies. The moment that Naruto laid eyes upon the lower half of Yuki face, his mind was invaded with a plethora of images. There were only a few in total, but they repeated and repeated in his mind. Had his arms not been tied to the post, he could have clutched his head in pain. The first of the images to appear was of a girl with short blue hair, a soft smile upon her lips, while her pale lavender eyes showed a look of worry. Naruto believed that he didn't know who she was, but he must have to have seen her in a memory. Another image was of a more brazen girl with platinum blonde hair. She had her hair up in a high ponytail, and from the right angle, it appeared to look like a music note. Next, a much older man appeared. He wore white robes with red trim and had a small beard of sorts. Despite his frail appearance, he held an aura of power. The last of the images was of a figure that Naruto could only describe as beautiful. They had long black hair and a pink flowery kimono. The constant influx of memories, coupled with the speed at which they appeared, caused Naruto to groan in pain. Hearing the boy, Anko and Yuki looked at him with worry. They pulled themselves away from their food to go and tend to Naruto. Naruto, are you okay? Yuki asked him, pulling her mask back fully over her face. She set her food down on the ground to crawl slightly over to the boy in pain. He did not reply instantly, waiting until the barrage of memories was over before doing anything else. His breathing was choppy and short, a small strand of sweat trailing down his face as he recovered from the brief assault on his mind. As time passed, his breathing became even, and his emotions were evened out. There were people, he said quietly, his head still hurting a little from the images. I think I remember them. I don't know. He had seen the images, and now he could look back at them, but he still felt like any idea of who they were was out of his reach. His eyes moved to Yuki, whom he could feel her worry from just by looking at her mask. He looked at her for a long minute, unsure of why he was unable to look away. Once the minute was over, Naruto looked around at Anko and Zabuza, the latter just arriving at the scene. What did you see, kid? Zabuza spoke to him. Some people. I knew them, I think, he replied to the swordsman, still unsure about who exactly he had seen. Anko looked at her surrogate brother with interest. Can you describe them? She asked him eagerly. She knew a few of the genin that were in Naruto's class for his safety and assumed that she would be able to help if he happened to describe any he knew. Naruto hummed as he attempted to concentrate. As easy as it was to see them in his head, describing them verbally seemed to be something else entirely. He showed difficulty with it for several minutes before sighing and shaking his head. Sorry, he muttered to the 3 people around him. I can see them, I just can't. It's weird. His thoughts began to jumble up the more he tried to think about the people that he saw. The 3 faces before him all showed concern, even if one of those faces couldn't actually be seen. Yuki Onna and Zabuza sighed in resignation, understanding that they just needed to keep waiting for him to get a better grasp of all of the memories he lost. However, Anko was not backing down. She scooted closer to him and examined his face carefully. "There has to be something," she said to him. "A face, their clothing, anything." Naruto was quiet once more. His eyes shut tight and his brain working its hardest. It was another several minutes before anyone said anything and Naruto's head dropped low in self-loathing. "Sorry, his eyes squeezed tighter than before. Blonde purple wide eyes, I think." He did his best to describe the things he had seen, but the words escaped his mind as he attempted to say them. The whole thing gave him another headache. Black hair robes ice. The thoughts were all scrambled, but that was the best he could get out. His breaths became heavy once more, but mind clouded with thoughts he couldn't yet process. It took another few minutes of help, but he was able to calm down again. Yuki Onna cut Naruto free from the stump in the ground and moved aside to allow Anko to hold the boy close. "It's alright, kid. You're remembering, and that's the important part," she said into his ear, slowly letting go of him and allowing him to stretch. Yuki Onna stepped forward and put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Once she had his attention, she spoke to him. "She's right. It may hurt now, but it should get better as time passes." The masked woman knelt down and grabbed her box of food before handing it to Naruto. "Are you sure?" he asked her, getting only a nod in return. Hesitantly, he ate the food that was offered to him. Zabuza, who had been rather quiet for the last few minutes, stood up and moved just behind Yuki Onna. They both watched as Naruto stepped away and sat down to eat. "Catalyst?" Yuki Onna could hear Zabuza whisper. The masked woman nodded silently, a fierce blush appearing underneath her mask. "Even if his memories don't fully return, he seems to remember him." She drifted off quickly, the blush on her cheeks. Zabuza's smile twisted into a smirk. "Telling him would make things so much easier for your fantasies," he whispered into her ear, causing the woman to turn her head to the other masked ninja. "Zabuza-sama." She spoke quietly. "If it was meant to be, it will happen. Rushing things may cause negative results." Her voice rose unconsciously, causing the boy to look at the two of them before widening his eyes, slumping forward. The honorific used for Zabuza by Yuki Onna had sent him into another state of shock. The light in his eyes died quickly. He was unconscious once again, and the three people near him tended to him as much as they could. Meanwhile, in Konoha, Konoha was divided, which was rather surprising considering the matter to which they were divided about. The large majority of the civilian population, as well as a fair handful of shinobi, were still joyous about the disappearance of Naruto Uzumaki, who they hadn't seen in almost a week. They assumed what they considered the best and believed that he died somewhere far away from the village. However, everyone else in the village was morose about the disappearance of the Uzumaki boy. Some of them didn't care for or enjoy the boy's presence, but soon found that it was difficult to make it throughout the day without seeing his million-watt smile. He made people happy and cheered people up whenever they seemed to be down. Not many personally knew Naruto, and those who did were the most upset about his lack of presence in the village. Some had even noticed that another person had gone missing as well. There were only 3 people on the entire civilian side of the council who were sad to see Naruto missing. The biggest name of the 3 was Councilman Ichiraku, who had recently been instated due to his slowly growing control over the ramen shops in the village and to a smaller extent food imports and exports. The more militant members of ninja clans, as well as the village elders, were more angered than saddened. They no longer had their weapon at their disposal. These people, surprisingly, did not include the shinobi councilman and councilwoman. These people were mainly the Hyuga elders, who had the same opinion of Naruto as Danzo. There was only one person in the entire village who was completely calm about the situation, and only he knew the truth behind Naruto and Anko's disappearance. Hiruzen Sarutobi stood at the council table, overlooking everyone on both the shinobi and civilian councils. Sitting in his comfortable and padded seat, he recalled the events of just less than a week ago. Hiruzen was the first person to kick down Naruto's door a day after he had been confirmed missing. He had made sure that he would be the first to investigate, as he considered anything having to do with Naruto a personal matter. The old and withered man still had a great deal of strength inside of him, and while his instincts were dulled from age, he was still rather capable as a ninja. The first thing he noticed about Naruto's home was that it was picked bone dry. There was only a single thing inside. A note. It was addressed specifically to Hiruzen himself, and whoever had made the note either knew that he would be the first to respond or that others would evaluate it to make sure it was safe for the leader of the village. Without a sound, the old man bent down and picked up the note in the center of the bedroom. It was more than just a note, it was an envelope with at least 2 papers inside. Hiruzen opened the envelope and pulled out the first of the papers. There was much more in the envelope than he had expected, but nonetheless, he had read everything. It certainly wasn't what he was expecting, but he went along with the plan for Naruto's health and safety. Just as quickly as he entered the house, he left with the letters and retreated to his office in the Hokage Tower. Now, Naruto had been quite the topic for the council meetings, normally with the majority of the civilians making a snide remark about his disappearance and the shinobi defending the boy and wishing that they could have helped him, but also commenting on how they had been deliberately prevented from doing so. We should send out search parties. Inoichi Yamanaka told the people around him, his concern evident for the boy and not for his status of what he was. The shinobi heads, as well as 3 civilians, nodded in agreement to the suggestion. Why? Scoffed one of the civilian council members. If he actually is alive, he could kill anyone we send after him. We don't want to waste any men on him. Just let the wilderness claim him. Just about all of the civilians, save the previously mentioned 3, agreed with letting him die by whatever wild beasts might be out and about. The air in the room became tense once more. Both sides were stone still in their stance when regarding the boy. They both knew that they stood for and what the other side stood for. Both sides had been rather relaxed up until Naruto's disappearance. Now they were taking shots at one another left and right. Down to the core of every argument, it was down to how they wanted the missing boy to be treated. Ekuishizutsume barked, but immediately stopped upon feeling a light gaze from the Hokage himself. The Abuzuka matriarch shuffled in her seat and sat quietly. Her eyes flicked towards the other shinobi councilmen. She had seen it, they all had at one point or another. He was so much like them, but at the same time, so much of his own person. She wanted to put them in their place, but it wasn't the right time. The time would come soon enough though. It was now the early evening in the Kurigaka rebel camp. Naruto had become the victim of many more headaches and ended up spending a good part of each day unconscious. While he did recover more memories, all of the faces in the memories were gone and everyone he interacted with were just blank slates of memories waiting to be uncovered. Currently, Naruto was getting some rest in his tent while the others ate. Anko made sure that there was some food left over for him to eat when he woke up again. Mei's group, consisting of herself, Anko, Zabuza, Yukiana, Ao and Chijuro, all sat together at one of the tables. It was a rather strange group, but they were the best in the camp and proved to be a formidable force. The group was eating quietly. With so many lakes and rivers nearby, catching food was not difficult in the least. Especially when 2 members of Mei's team wielded swords of great power to catch the big game with. None of the people at the table had anything to say. Throughout the day, everyone had had their short turn with training Naruto. It didn't last as long as they had hoped, but they believed that they had instilled at least something in the boy that day. So Mei spoke just loud enough for the others to hear. What's all this about Naruto today? I've heard bits and pieces, but nobody said what actually happened. The group traded glances at one another. He's recovering. Anko was the first to speak, gaining a majority of the attention. Her hands moved about as she spoke. This and that, but nothing too groundbreaking. Her eyes wandered to Zabuza, who snuck in a small nod as he coughed, seemingly having difficulty with his food. There was a pause before Anko spoke again. We think Naruto remembers Zabuza. Everything he's getting back is scattered all over the place, so we can't take guesses at what he's going to relearn or remember next. Mei sat and ate quietly, occasionally letting out a small hum of thought as she processed the information. After a number of minutes in silence, Mei spoke. How much does he remember? Zabuza shook his head at the auburn-haired woman. Still hardly anything. Lots of memories, but they're all just flashes. Nothing fleshed out just yet. The rebel leader continued to eat, pausing every so often to speak to the men and women around her. So, they aren't even really memories yet. Just fragments. She sighed to herself, looking at the food just in front of her face before taking another bite. On the upside, that means there's still room for improvement before things start settling in again. On the downside, all of these attacks, let's call them, will hinder him when he goes out and fights. Anko looked up from her food, which she had continued eating as Mei spoke to them. Naruto wasn't ready for a fight, especially against ninja of Kiri's standard. They had only been training for a few days, and she didn't know how soon Mei was planning on sending him out. Yukiana seemed distressed as well. Her thoughts were similar to Anko's, but she had more faith in the boy and his abilities. He's going to be fine out there. Mei told them. He'll be doing all of his work in a group with you 3. Zabuza was still healing, but he assumed that he would be ready to head back out and fight soon. Maybe it would also help Naruto to learn in the field where actual danger would be present. The chatter began to grow steadily and nobody noticed the small boy walking over towards them and sitting next to Anko until he was already there. He hadn't made a single sound on his way there and didn't say anything as he leaned into the purple-haired woman. Surprised, Anko looked at him, the obvious curiosity etched into her features. What's up, kiddo? She asked him. Her hand made its way to his hair, ruffling it briefly. Naruto, when he still had his memories, would often protest against such childish names, causing her to use them even more. Now, he seemed to enjoy the names, as she seemed to be a person who was close to him and cared for him. Nothing was his short reply. I woke up again, and I went to find you. The boy looked up at Anko with those wide and innocent eyes of his. they made her happy and sad at the same time. Those were the innocent eyes she had seen a little more than 6 years ago when she had first met him. However, as the years passed, those eyes of innocence were replaced with eyes of fiery compassion and determination. The world around him would shatter all over again, and just like last time, she would see it on his face as it happened. "Want some food?" Anko spoke up once more, trying her best to avoid her previous train of thought. Before Naruto was able to answer, Anko stood up and walked away to get him some food, leaving him with his new mentors and leader. There was an awkward silence. Nobody had anything to say at the moment, and the night continued to be quiet even after Anko returned with his food. Naruto had come up with a few thoughts regarding the masked ninja around him, but decided to keep them to himself. Once again we return to Konoha, where a growing ramen company is doing its best to maintain order within itself. It was rather well known that Naruto had eaten regularly at Ichiraku Ramen, and since his disappearance, everyone who had supported the boy had taken to eating there regularly. The spike of growth was so large that the man had to get more employees, as well as areas for people to eat at. Of course, this all didn't happen in the course of a week. The popularity of the place had been growing steadily over the past few months, but now the need to expand was greater than ever, and with it, Tucci was rewarded with a council spot for being so influential over the city recently. The change was so recent and sudden, in fact, that the ramen chef was included in the council meeting at the last moment. What few ideas Tucci had suggested to the council for furthering the development of the city as well as maintaining peace were surprising. It wasn't something people were expecting from a civilian, especially one like Tucci himself, but the ideas were put into thought and would be reviewed further in the next meeting. While it was more or less accepted that the Anbu now acted as the police force in Konoha, the ramen chef suggested creating another police force, but not allow it to be controlled by any one force or clan. Both civilians and shinobi would be allowed to join and volunteer. They would be given special rights, but nothing that would make them above the laws that they held. There would be stations and monitors in each of the districts, with the main station being integrated into the Anbu offices. It was obvious that they would be working side by side, and it made sense for them to work close to one another. The symbol for the new police force would be a variation on the symbol of Konoha, with the spaces in the swirls being filled in with red and intricate lines being drawn around the symbol itself, resembling a seal of some sort. Tucci said that the design could be reworked to work as an actual storage seal, or something similar. It was needless to say that the idea gained him favor with both sides, but the shinobi clans enjoyed the idea much more. Despite this, everyone saw how well the idea worked on paper, and with a moment of thinking and debating between Shikaku and Inoichi, they believed that it could be finished and worked into the village in less than a year. While he did have ideas to share with the council, he also had ideas to share with his daughter, who worked alongside him at the main Ichiraku ramen shack. "Dusan, that's a crazy idea." Am giggled at her father, who had begun to create more and more ludicrous ramen ideas by the day. Nobody would eat ramen with banana slugs in them. Tucci chuckled to himself. There's always a group of people out there who would eat something like this. His smile went away, and the small chuckle he had was replaced with a breath of sadness. Am frowned. The air around them became heavy as recent memories resurfaced. The recent events had kept them busy from mourning over the disappearance of Naruto. They both continued their cooking in silence. If anyone could find him, it'd be her, Tucci thought to himself silently, his hands moving on their own as the steam from the broth hit his face. As hot as it was right in front of the boiling broth, the ramen chef felt quite cold. If the courier ninja were as fast as he believed them to be, then the woman on his mind would have gotten his message in a day or possibly even in a few hours. "Dusan." A soft and familiar voice broke the old man out of his trance. Tucci turned his head to look at his daughter, who pointed at the customer sitting in what used to be Naruto's usual spot. The Ichiraku duo became uncomfortable with their current seating placement, but neither said anything to them. The old man cleared his throat, still uneasy about the seating of the other man. "Oh, hello." He put his cheery front back on, a little trick he had learned a while back from a good friend. "Welcome to the Ichiraku ramen. What will you be having today?" "Miso," was the man's simple reply. His relaxed gaze conflicted with his stone-cold voice. His voice was distant, as if he was focusing on other things at the current moment. "Please," he added after a moment of silence. Tucci nodded slowly. He was many things, but one of them was not stupid. He was sitting in Naruto's spot, ordering Naruto's favorite meal. "Anything else to add?" he asked the strange man. He said nothing, simply shaking his head and looking down at the table in front of him. He had a strange aura around him. It was obvious that he was not a local. He was distant to the people and happenings around him, and his clothing was much more dulled down than the bright and vibrant colors that most normal people wore in Konoha. Minutes passed, and when his food was finally ready, he was still silent. Tucci kept his smiling face on as he handed the man his food and watched silently and patiently as he did so, hardly making a sound. It was uncomfortable to watch. He knew that something was up, but the man was saying nothing. Tucci couldn't call him out, however, as it would garner him too much unwanted attention. As the man finished, he simply placed his money down on the table just beside the bowl and gave Tucci a rather strange glance before nodding in thanks and leaving. As the ramen chef picked up the money and counted it all up, he noticed a small sheet of paper hiding between the bills. On the paper were 4 identical marks with a nautical curve on each one. Tucci looked at the direction of where the man was headed but saw nobody that fit the description of who he had just seen. He wanted to thank the man. AM, who had yet to see the paper, was confused on the recent turn of events. Her father's presence was now much more different than it had been in the last few days. She had listened in but could not watch as she had to cook ramen for the other customers. "Dusan?" She spoke up, setting a bowl down in front of a young woman and picking up the bowl of the man who had just left. Tucci was grinning from ear to ear as he turned to his only daughter. He showed only her the paper in her hand and once she had seen it, he put it away. As AM set her eyes on the paper the strange man had left, she instantly recognized the mark. With a gulp, she smiled and felt at ease. Naruto clenched the handle of his weapon with a relaxed but firm grip. The blade of his weapon sitting motionless on his shoulder, waiting for him to pull it forward and attack. His stance was calm and relaxed, his mind counting down and waiting for the moment to strike. On the other end of the field, his teacher waited in a similar stance. The large and clearly wide sword seemed to be just as big as its wielder. However, the blue-haired boy only had a small amount of trouble with wielding it. He was proficient with his weapon, he still had a ways to go before he would be considered a master. "Alright Naruto, once more." Chijuro spoke rather quietly, but just loud enough for Naruto to be able to hear his words. "We'll keep going until you can fight with your eyes closed." Naruto nodded. He knew how his teacher felt about his own skills, but he seemed pretty willing to teach another and see just how far Naruto could go. The boy showed palm eyes. He was calm, steady, and eager to learn. It also took his mind off of things while his other teachers were off fighting and doing. Only consisted of Anko, who went under the alias of Hebe whenever she donned her mask, Zabuza, the de facto leader of the group of which was named after him, and Yuki Onna, whose appearance and identity were unknown to all except two. The three of them worked together and closely with the rebellion leader herself, as well as her personal bodyguards. Clearing out camps, recon, if one were to name a field task, they had most likely done it. With a small look of surprise, Naruto thought of an idea that could possibly give him the upper hand. Quickly, he sheathed his sword and made but 2 hand seals, creating a gust of wind below of him. Subsequently, a thick layer of dust covered the immediate area. Juro's eyes widened. It was surely an interesting turn, and he had to be even more careful now that he could no longer see. With burst of chakra, Naruto created a trio of clones, all of which were tasked with surrounding Chijuro and keeping him busy. They knew their teacher's position and had a pretty good idea of how he would move if he were to leave where they expected him to be. Fortunately, Chijuro stood his ground and prepared himself for an attack from any side. The sound of a blade cutting through the air alerted him of what he assumed to be Naruto's location. His blade clashed with the other, but the sound hit his ears once more. He hardly had enough time to realize and react to the fact that Naruto was using clones against him and jumped over the blade swinging at his feet, his large blade pushing up to distance himself from the other Naruto. While he didn't have any idea which one was the real one, Chijuro could not take the offense and aimed to dispel them. In the event that he did hit the original Naruto, he could be seriously injured. He had to keep on the defensive for his student safety. Touching the ground, Chijuro waited for the dust to settle. Little did he realize, when the dust settled, 4 identical copies of Naruto were pointing their swords at him from all angles. He could make no moves against the boy and drew his free hand into the air. "Well done." The team praised his student. "I couldn't say that I expected it. Well, it wasn't the drill we were going over, it was good." He smiled briefly, gaining more of Naruto's already undivided attention. "But, if I was aiming to kill or injure you, that might not have worked. If it were real, then you should have impaled me the moment my foot touched the ground. I'd have no way to protect myself from swords in every direction." The 5th Naruto, the real one, walked out from behind one of the clones as they put away their swords. He nodded with a small smile, accepting the praise that was given to him, as well as the criticism. "Right," he replied. Maybe he'd become good enough to actually beat his masters sometime in the future. He certainly was excited to be trained in swordsmanship. From what he had been told, it was a subject that he had never touched on before he lost his memory. He used to be a wild, charismatic and dangerous opponent, and while he seemed to have lost the second quality, the other 2 were definitely intact. He was as smart as attack with a reasonable margin for mistakes and blank moments. He was just a kid after all. Wordlessly, the clones dispelled, a puff of smoke in their places. Given the current context, Naruto had led himself to believe that the lesson was over for the time being. Just as he began to walk away, Naruto was stopped by the feeling of something poking the back of his neck. "Where do you think you're going?" Chijuro asked, edging the sword further just so slightly. Naruto said nothing, instead making a break for it and running several yards away before spinning around, the sword in both of his hands. Final round. Naruto spoke with confidence. There was only a brief pause before the clashing of steel could be heard throughout the camp. Naruto was unwilling to hold back, and a similar thing could be said for Juro. He knew he still couldn't go full blast at Naruto, but he was kicking things up several notches to make sure that his student was still challenged. One hit after another, Naruto and Juro continued to battle, seemingly in a stalemate of skill. Their swords connected constantly. As time passed, Naruto began to grow more and more frustrated. His attack began to slow and become increasingly more sloppy. Juro could see this, but continued to bring the heat. Naruto would have to learn how to deal with this, as an actual opponent would not let him stop. The more Naruto's blade continued to meet his master's, the more aggravated he became. It had reached the point in which he had to play dirty in order to Juro away. In a swift motion, Naruto swung his sword at Juro, foreseeing that the bespectacled boy would block. Their swords pressed against one another, both of them struggling to get the other to fall back. Naruto then rolled to the side. Juro fought with his right hand on top, and Naruto knew this. In order to avoid getting cut, Naruto had to move with Juro's swing to the right. This caused him to lose his balance and stumble forward to avoid falling. With this, he was unable to keep his eyes on Naruto. When he recovered, Naruto was out of sight. Well, where did he go? Juro muttered to himself. He looked around. All he could see was Naruto's blade stabbed into the earth before him. He wondered why he was abandoning the sword, but still remained wary. He had just pulled off a rather underhanded tactic and would need to be ready for anything. The sword was slowly and carefully pulled out of the ground. Naruto was given a small window of time to escape or devise a trap, so he wasn't too cautious about the scenario. Naruto. You know that you should never drop your weapon, even with chakra at your disposal. Juro called out to Naruto, wherever he may have been. The rustling diverted his attention. Juro was forced to sheathe the second blade and look to where he had heard a noise. Another noise caused him to look elsewhere. Either Naruto was pulling clones, or he really was that fast. A moment later, Naruto appeared before his master, seemingly no longer sporting the sword that he had earlier. Juro sighed in relief. At least he was alright, but what game was he playing? Without any notice, Naruto lunged towards Juro, pulling out the exact same sword Juro was carrying. Instinctively, Juro prepped himself for a block. The clashing of steel informed him that he was fighting the real sword, as a person hinged into a weapon would be cut in half, as if they were real. They were locked in battle once more, but something was certainly different this time around. A puff of smoke engulfed Juro. The blade that he had been carrying for Naruto was replaced with Naruto. The Naruto who had been the sword immediately latched onto his master, a kunai pressed against his neck just waiting to cut through. Juro didn't struggle. He knew that Naruto wouldn't actually hurt him, but he did in fact tell him to fight as if he were fighting a real opponent. Even if it wasn't the intention, Naruto was still in the position to easily kill or injure Juro. The older boy chuckled, relaxing his posture and letting go of his massive sword. Naruto took this as a sign to get off and dispelled his clone. As the close dispelled, the sword that he had been carrying, as well as its sheath, dropped to the ground. Juro took notice of this and nodded his head in understanding. In Juro's time of disorientation, Naruto snuck away and created a clone, giving him the actual sword, while he himself hinged into the sword so his clone could stab him into the ground just for Juro to pick up. It was genius, Juro had to give him that. While risky, it did work on him, and any bandit or ninja would certainly take a sword if it didn't seem to be trapped. Dumb it may have been, but that was how it worked. Good job, Naruto. He praised his student. I'd say that's enough for now. The boy jumped into the air, celebrating his victory over an older and more experienced fighter. What if Neglected Naruto fights in Kiri Civil War harem? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.